Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Worm, a Daily Planet Films podcast series where we expertly dissected and discussed the hit web serial Worm week by week, arc by arc. I am your host and guy who read Worm, Matt Freeman, and this is my co-host, other guy who read Worm, Scott.
Matt, we're equals now. We're peers. There's no more demeaning introductions of me, no more forcing me to sing or calling me your homunculus or something else. Finally, Matt, we are the same.
Mm-hmm. Scott, read the next part of the script now.
Yes, sir. This is the podcast where you guided me through Wild Bill's world of superheroes, supervillains, and everything in between as we inspected, interpreted, and even speculated on what this story was and where it was going. This week on the podcast, we're done. We're at the end, and It's mailbag time. The final mailbag of Worm here on the first week of the new year. So new year, ending a podcast. Kind of sad, but also as a whole kind of happy. Yeah.
It's kind of got some Lord of the Rings type beginnings and endings shit going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna answer all your questions. We're gonna go through your words of God. I think we got a bunch of recommendations from you on which ones we should read. Matt himself also curated a list for me. So we're going to discuss those as we go through the questions. You guys asked questions, ranging the gamut. We had Worm specific questions, a few questions on Ward and what I think it's going to be. And then we got just some of our general questions on us and things we like and podcasting and all that stuff. So, we got a lot of them. We're going to get through as many as we can. As always, we'll say, if we didn't get to your question, we're sorry. There's just, especially on this one, there were a lot of them. And some of you guys asked very similar questions. So in those cases, we didn't want to repeat the question. But yeah, I think we got a pretty good selection of questions here. So, and we're going to get through a lot of them. So I'm excited.
Yeah. And we're not doing like a questions section and a Word of God section specifically. It's more like, a lot of you had Word of God questions in your, in your questions, and then I'm just going to kind of throw mine in, and you'll get all that in one big dose.
Yeah, I think
of goodness.
I think that's the best way to do it. And you and I have talked about the whole idea around Words of God, and I understand why people like this so much, and I think it's great that Wild Bill is so interactive with his community, and he wrote this thing, he built this community, and he interacts with it every single day, and I think that's really wonderful. I don't want to get too into the weeds of some of this stuff where we're like sitting down and analyzing every little thing he said for the past 2 years about every character. We picked out ones that are interesting. There's some that are super interesting for me to read, but I don't have any like commentary on it other than that was neat. That was cool. So there's nothing really to discuss on a podcast. I think we're going to go through the ones that breed discussion, that fill in some blanks, that maybe close out some of my speculations, stuff like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this concept of Word of God quite a bit because I do enjoy knowing some of this information and knowing about the creative process that went into creating this story. But for me, like where my interest is personally, it has a lot to do with how the narrative was told,
right?
And like extra story information, while it can be really fun, is not really connected to how the story was told because it's outside the story. And there's a reason it wasn't in the story usually.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So yeah, that's why there was, more than a handful of instances where I kind of refrained from mentioning a Word of God that I happened to know that I could have mentioned in the moment when we were going through the story, because I was like, that's not the time to talk about this because it is not revealed in the story, and I want to understand the story as it's being told and what went into that and be in that world. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I like, it's a little different with this, a little like, because with a published book that's on a shelf somewhere, that's been through 20 different editing passes, that kind of stuff. That's every word on that page is a word that the author wanted there. And if it's not there, it's because it didn't need to be there. This is a little bit different because Wild Bill is going back and re-editing things. So a lot of these things we talk about might possibly make their way into the story one day, but from our approach of analyzing this thing as a finished work, we had to just take what was on the page and what we could see and what was published, I guess, connecting to that narrative. So yeah, these things are fun, but they are extemporaneous. They are separate.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I think without further ado, we can get into the mailbag questions. Before we do that, I want to mention that you should listen through to the end of this episode and not tune out when we get to the outro. Just trust us there. Mysterious. That's right. Which you have all been doing the whole time. You've been listening through to the end the whole time.
I mean, who would not do that?
Yeah. I'm sure none of our loyal listeners.
No, it would never happen.
No. All right. So first question from, and you're all going to have to bear with me on the pronunciations as usual.
Marquis.
Fathom Atlas. Yeah, Marquis. Yeah. From Fathom Atlas. What do you think about the Brockton Bay wards and their arcs over the course of the story?
Yeah, so this is a great question to start with because I like this a lot. And I think the Brockton Bay wards are interesting because they're never, besides that one arc we get with them, they're never really the focus of the story. They're there, we see them, we kind of see the things that they're going through, but it's always kind of in the background. But we kind of see what it's like to be a young hero in this world through them specifically. Like everything they go through, the trials, the tribulations, the terrible stuff that Vista has to go through, the way that Clockblocker is destroyed by this world, Kid Win who finds his place and then dies rather unceremoniously. It's kind of this window into what everyday life for just hero on the hero team looks like.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the tragedy enters the story, because without the focus on the Brockton Bay wards and the other heroes to different degrees, you could get sucked into a view of like, this is just all darker shades of gray fighting even darker shades of gray. You've got, the Travelers and the Undersiders versus the Nine, and basically just like violence and negative sum contest between these variously bad people, some of which are less bad than others, but they all seem pretty bad. But the wards were actually like kids who were trying to like do good and do the right thing, and all for different, believable, understandable reasons. And like you said, this is a really harsh world, and it did not, this was not the kind of superhero, story that ends with like a big happy music swell as the hero, flies toward the camera and the credits roll. There were no breaks cut for the Brockton Bay wards. So I think that was kind of exemplifies what the difference between what this story is and what other superhero stories are.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think it's cool to see them as a reflection of a potential end road for Taylor, right? That if this was kind of always Taylor's goal, that she was going to, even when she joined the villains at first, it was just to bide her time and then join the wards, and she was going to be on the Brockton Bay team. And this is a potential future for her. And we see that even that is not a good one. Even that is really just as dangerous and tragic as everything else in this world. And I think it is a good reflection of that. So yeah. I really liked all their stories a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Kid Win is still a loser, but
yeah.
he did good. You did good, buddy.
He did his best. This next question from Aquamarius. So by the way, I'm going to be paraphrasing these questions. I'm not going to be reading them out loud because that would take hours.
Yeah, they're very. Some of them are very long.
Yeah. So this person asks. They point out what essentially a candidate for a 3-beat. We have in 14.8 we have Bonesaw pretending to be Tattletale in the Agnosia cloud, saying, I've kept way too many secrets for someone who calls herself Tattletale. And then in 15.4 we have Tattletale refusing to elaborate on the Noelle situation to Taylor. And Taylor says, for someone who calls herself Tattletale, you're way too fond of keeping secrets, which is parallels what Bonesaw said. And then in 19.1, one of the Skitter clones tells Tattletale, basically in a very angry and accusatory way. Like, you're keeping secrets from me, even at the best of times, even when you knew what I'd gone through. And so it's interesting how this person's pointing out that this basically kind of almost like a barb that Bonesaw put in when she was pretending to be Tattletale is kind of like translated deep into Taylor's psyche and manifested itself out through the clone. And it does, I mean, it seems like a 3-beat to me, or at least it's an intentional bit of structuring. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, it absolutely could be. The realist in me sees this and it strikes me as the type of thing that might have just been Wildbow inadvertently reusing a phrase that he likes. Like, he likes the idea of the phrase, "You keep too many secrets for someone who calls themselves Tattletale," and it might just be he liked that grouping of words a lot. And as someone who's gone back and listened to myself throughout the course of this podcast repeat points that I've made almost verbatim without remembering it over and over again, I could see that being something that he could have possibly done. On the other hand, it absolutely makes sense that this could be a structured 3-beat, that Bonesaw put this in her head and she kind of reflected on it, and then it manifested itself out through her clone. And I like that. And I think that's the cool thing about writing, Matt, that even if this is just Wildbow really liked this phrase and just happened to use it a lot, it's here. It's still here, and it is a structured 3-beat, and you can take that as that, and you can use that interpretation, and you can say that, yes, this is what I think happened. And it might not be intended, but it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of writing, particularly when you're getting into a character's head, ends up being subconscious. It's almost like a kind of acting where, you don't have the processing power to precisely control every detail.
Right.
You're offloading a lot of that to your kind of human person simulating software. And a lot of that, I think, is subconscious. And I don't know. I've definitely, Wildbow has pulled off more intricate 3-beats and other plot structures than this. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool either way, like you said.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question from Regvlas. Who was Valkyrie making eyes at in the security footage when it, so basically says Valkyrie was trying not to look like she was paying too much attention to this young man in a white bodysuit. So what's going on here, Scott?
Well, I think so. The word of God on this is that the guy in the white bodysuit has red hair, right? That's something that Wildbow added afterwards. So that seems to be a not so subtle indication that maybe she brought Dennis back to life. We left Valkyrie toying with this idea that maybe she could put her spirits inside creations made by Nilbog and thus bring them back to life. So maybe that's what we're hinting at here. I don't know how much I like that. I mean, I like, and especially considering there's a sequel. Like, if there was not a sequel to Worm, if this was just a fun little Easter egg we left the story with, then I think that would be fine. But because we're in a sequel or moving forward, and I'm assuming Valkyrie will be a relatively important, if not extremely important, character in the story going forward, I would hate to see us kind of just use this as a reverse on every death that happened in the previous story,
Yeah, right. I feel pretty identically, I think. I mean, because before I kind of knew that Worm was going to have a sequel, I was like, oh, okay, that's neat. And then I just kind of didn't think about it much more. But then you start thinking about the implications of it in terms of like, oh, are we going to see these characters again? Is this going to undermine the really impactful deaths that we got for, Clockblocker is probably one of my number one ones where I was like, one of the things that makes the story feel real is that a character as important as Clockblocker is killed off screen, basically.
Yeah.
Well,
and it feels, and I don't want to say this, it feels kind of fan servicey to me, because like, and I think that's okay because it's in a statement that Wildbow made, extra textually. It's not in the book. So, but the only reason for the first person that Valkyrie to have brought back is Dennis is because we, the fans, like Clockblocker so much. So, there's no in-universe reason for that. So it feels to me like this at one point could have just been a fun thing, just a fun bone to throw to people. Like, hey, look at this. This could possibly have been the guy you all love. And I don't know.
Yeah, right. And that's one thing about Word of God is like, I have no problem. But like, it's one thing to say, I want to make sure I say this right. Like, it's one thing for Rowling to come out and be like, oh yeah, by the way, Dumbledore was gay. Like, because that's like, that doesn't really have anything to do with the story and doesn't matter really. Right. Like it doesn't change anything. And there's a lot of Word of God where it doesn't change anything. And then there's Word of God where it does change something. And you go back and you say like, oh, this person was lying about this. Yeah. Like, canonically, it's like, oh, well, that wasn't in the texts, and now I have to rethink all kinds of motivations and stuff like that, in terms of why events happened. And the problem is there's not really like a bright line between these things, because you could very well say, oh, Dumbledore being gay did change things. It changed certain motivations. It's like, yeah, but I think you know what I mean. There's a spectrum, definitely.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think you're right. I think that this is where it's complicated, and this is where these things get. This is our first Word of God question. We're already on this idea that this is kind of nebulous, and we're in this weird area where, like, how much does this matter? How much does it not? And like I said, the only reason I think this matters is because we are not done with this world yet. We are going back into this world, and if we've just done this and created something in this world, I worry what that means going forward.
Yeah.
How it does recontextualize and how it does change a lot of what we just saw. Because, I mean, Brian died on that oil rig when she was around. And so are we going to bring Brian back too? Like, did she take his shard? Like, what? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see. All right. Next question from Sir Graug. Whose character arc in the story most surprised you? And which one did you feel? Sorry, I really messed that up. Yeah.
We're rusty. It's been 2 whole weeks since we podcasted.
Yeah, I know. I really forgot how to do this. Whose character arc and story surprised you the most, and which one did you feel you most expected? Whose arc was the most satisfying to you, and whose was the least?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
I think I've said this before, but I'll go ahead and say it again. Imp's surprised me the most. And I think it's just because, like Imp herself, she just kind of sneaks up on you, and you don't realize the transformation that this character is going through is pretty masked at first. And it's not until really after the time jump that you really start to see the things that she's becoming and the things that she's doing, and you find yourself suddenly caring about her in this way that you didn't think before. She was always kind of outside the central group in my head because she was a late joiner, similar to Parian and Foyle. But then suddenly you just find yourself caring about her so much. And that I did not expect that to be how things went down. And I was really happy about it because I like Aisha a lot, and I like her arc, and I like the journey she goes through. When the character was introduced, you could have said $1 million if you guessed if this character is going to be important, and I never would have done it.
Yeah. In terms of most surprising, I definitely feel similarly about Imp. I think Colin, Defiant would be one for me because of how, again, like you just said, if you told me this character, as he's represented toward the beginning, turns into this guy later on. Oh, and by the way, it feels really organic and earned. Like that's the part that's harder to swallow. Usually, is like people try all kinds of really unbelievable character, changes when the plot calls for it. Like, oh, this guy needs to become evil now, so they just start doing bad things. And it's like that's difficult to pull off in a way that feels earned, and you're like, yeah, I buy that. In fact, if I were in that situation, I would act that way. And Defiance really did. One of the one of my favorite moments, one of my big like fist pump moments is when Defiant is the one at the switch, to kill Scion, and it's like, yeah, that was earned.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That's a good answer too. Most expected, I'm going to say Rachel here, because I think the thing about Rachel's arc, and we've talked glowingly about this thing basically through the second half of this entire book, but I think Rachel's arc is very standard, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, she goes from this like gruff, angry loner to a person that learns to be around and trust people again, and that's a very traveled arc in the world of fiction. But like I said last time, I think this is a textbook example of exactly how to do that arc right, and how to make it feel earned, as you said, and how to make it feel satisfying, and how you're along for the ride the entire way. So I saw this coming. I think one of the first things I guessed in one of our first episodes where we did speculations was that Rachel and Taylor were going to become really good friends by the end of the story. And of course I was right. So I expected it, but that didn't make it any less satisfying and any less beautiful.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a answer in my hip pocket for the most expected. I don't know if I think because of the way I read this story, I was not in a mode of forecasting things, and also like fairly early on. Yeah, I guess I should say this because this is an interesting, thing. I think like the story kept throwing me for a loop so many times toward the beginning that I just gave up on predicting it, which is silly because you've been so successful at it. But like, I would be certain that like, oh, she's gonna shack up with Brian in this chapter or this next chapter or whatever. And then Brian like rebuffed her and was like, I think of you as a sister. And I'm just like, oh, and I was like that's just one example toward the beginning of the story where I was, one, I kind of realized how invested I was in the characters,
mm-hmm.
and two, realized that like this author was going to stay one step ahead of me in terms of the dynamics of the characters. So, I was just reading hecka fast. So I didn't really get to a point where I was like, oh yeah, this is going to go this way. If I thought about it maybe, but I didn't think about it.
That's really funny because there's a post that was made in the thread today by a guy who decided to come to the their Parahuman subreddit and ask people when the book gets good, which is a dumb thing to do because everyone there is going to say the first page because obviously they like Worm or they wouldn't be hanging out in the subreddit. But anyway, his comments was about how this seems very standard YA fiction and like it's very obvious that Brian's going to be the love interest. And I was just like chuckling because all these things are subverted in very shocking ways going forward into the story.
Did anyone meme amazing? Everything you just said is wrong.
That's my favorite Last Jedi quote.
Right.
No, I don't think they did, but maybe I'll jump in there after this and do that. But yeah, I think you're right that generally the beginning of the story is setting up what maybe on the surface appears to be this very standard kind of YA story, and then it definitely shifts rather dramatically, so it makes predicting arcs difficult. And I think the thing you'll notice if you look back at my speculations, except for one or two times, I'm very like mute on broad overarching story moves the really wasn't until maybe arc 26 that I finally like realized what the overarching story was going to be. And I think that's because Worm kind of zigs and zags and you don't necessarily see where it's going at the beginning.
Yeah, right. I agree completely with that. That's it shifts footing so many times. It even shifts genre, as we talked about that as we went. And you definitely don't expect the Slaughterhouse 9 arc when you're in the first 3 or 4 arcs. You can't see that coming at all. It seems like a completely different story.
I still remember that first chapter that was in the wards arc, where we see them having left the dead burned people hung up and displayed, and I was like, shit, we're doing something else now. And that was after the huge Leviathan battle that I was like, there's fucking kaiju in this story now. So yeah, it definitely always is surprising. So I think we got completely off topic of that question, but it was fine. That's
fine. That's the point of these. It's like we're doing a live Reddit thread post.
Right.
So next one is from Slasher17. And this person is basically just telling us to go look at the worm memes on TV tropes.
I did that.
They're funny.
They're very funny.
So just kind of, I guess this counts as trivia. Like, one of the first kind of initial big sources of traffic to Worm was Some Good Samaritan going on TV tropes and making a really thorough, I don't know how to say it exactly, but basically littering Worm references throughout all of the tropes. and people then following those links to Worm, and that apparently led a lot of early readers. I don't know in the aggregate what that actually came to, but
that's pretty awesome, because that's one of the things I wonder. We were not in on this thing from the ground floor, and I mean, it was already done when you found it, right? Like, you didn't. Yeah. So it makes you wonder, like, how did this grow to the point where it is? And I think it's got a very high ceiling that it hasn't even gotten to yet, but you always wonder how the thing gets to where it is, because we basically relied on this community that already existed to funnel the growth in our show, but we weren't there to see how that grew initially. So it's cool to see that just one or two people deciding to do this led to something. That's cool.
Yeah, that was a big one. And Eliezer Yudkowsky of the rationalist community putting a pretty convincing plug on this being a good story was another thing that happened to lead a lot of people who happened to have the mentality that would appeal, that the story would appeal to. God, that was a terrible sentence. We're really out of practice.
It's all staying in.
Yeah.
This is good, because we'll be ready when we get to Ward.
Yep. We'll be all sharpened up.
Yep.
All right. Abyssonym. Oh, I like that. That's good. Says, basically, this person points out 2 Word of Gods, which are basically what if Word of Gods. And so my idea here was I didn't want to go into super deep detail on these. I just kind of wanted to talk about this idea of what if Word of God. So one of them, I think, was this idea of, like, what if Leviathan had hit, I think it was Florida instead of Brockton Bay.
Yes.
And one of them I think was what if Amy had joined the Undersiders.
Yeah, and there's also a what if there was no PRT. I think there's a what if no Cauldron as well.
Yeah.
That I read. Yeah, these are all super interesting, and like you said, there's not too much to go into discussion wise. I think the coolest thing about these is it shows, like, one of the reasons why this story is good is because Wildbow has such a good grasp on world building, and I think these what ifs show that, because he has such a good handle on the world and the characters that he can spout out, this little thing changes, and he feels the ripples because he knows the characters and he knows how the characters are going to react to that. He knows how that's going to change this. He has such a good grasp of his world that all this stuff can be created by him rather quickly and feels like it fits within the same world and the same story.
Yeah, right. It's like it almost doesn't matter what happens to the characters, because he puts character so front and center that their reaction is going to be authentic and is going to be satisfying regardless of what happens in the story, almost.
Yeah. My favorite part of the Leviathan one was how Armsmaster changed, because he didn't go kind of all out into his plan because it wasn't his home city and he couldn't predict the villains as well. So he stayed in the Protectorate and was, like, honored and an honored part of the Protectorate, and never freed Dragon, and all these things changed because of that. And it's all within character, because he never had his low point moment. And because he never had his low point moment, he could never go on this journey of discovery. And that makes total sense. And that's why, like, you see that you see that it's not that it had to happen that way, but it's just, I'm so thankful it did.
Yeah, right. Yeah, what's funny to me is, like, I have I have so much confidence in Wildbow at this point that, like, I really believe that it would have been, like, just as satisfying if it had gone a different way. Kind of like you said, it's like, it's weird to say, because I'm like, well, I don't actually want it to be any different than it was, because it was so great. But, like, you could have thrown any kind of wrench into the story, and he would have, like, done a 1080 and landed it. So,
yeah. And I think the other one there is just, I didn't read all of these because they're, like, really long, but he linked a bunch of his early Worm drafts, and I think this, again, like, I guess from what I gathered, from you and other people have told me, that at one point in time, Worm was not the story of Taylor. Worm was going to be Parahumans, which was just separate stories of people in this world and the things that they went through and the trials and tribulations of being a superhero in this world. And I think that's cool because, again, it goes back to this idea of world building, that because when Wildbow was structuring this world, it wasn't all about Taylor yet. He built all these things, and he built all these characters, and he built all these places and structures that make it feel real and make it feel lived in, and not just a thing that exists for Taylor's benefit.
Yeah, right.
For Taylor's story's benefit, not Taylor specifically, because none of this exists for Taylor's benefit. But that's so. I think that ties into that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, some of the, I don't think I pulled out any of these to talk about, because they're kind of the type where you're just like, oh, that's cool. But there's a lot of Word of Gods where it's like, oh, this is this one birdcage cape that is mentioned twice. This is her whole backstory. And you're like, okay, that's awesome. Like, that's creative and fun and cool. And, that's all I can say, really. but yeah, it's like, it's really clear that this whole, background world has been fleshed out. I think Wildbow actually made a comment somewhere that, like, people's thinking when they're talking and writing and thinking about the story tends to be too Taylor centric, because it's told from her point of view. But, like, I think the way he thinks of the story is not Taylor centric. I think it just happens to be that Taylor is the protagonist. Yeah,
and I think that makes sense. I think at the end of the day, I think this is her story. But yeah, I mean, she's one piece in a large world.
Yeah. Okay. Next we have, what are your favorite moments, scenes, interludes that recontextualize past events? What are the best written? What are the best executed? What are the best oh shit moments, etc. Basically, just an opportunity for us to kind of pick out badass moments, I guess.
Okay, I can do that. Right. My recontextualization, I almost put Bonesaw in here, and I think Bonesaw's interlude is wonderful, and probably what you're going to say. But I really liked everything with Emma. I really liked how learning about Emma and learning about what Emma went through recontextualized her entire relationship with Taylor, and the entire first, inciting incident of the book was suddenly kind of overturned and laid bare, and I just thought that was really wonderfully done, and it comes at almost a perfect time in the story when you're so far removed from Taylor as high school student suffering from bullying, that it's become just like taken for granted and a given that this was her past, and then suddenly it's like, nope, actually, you have to understand a little bit more about why all this happened, and I think that's just so brilliantly done.
Yeah, in terms of recontextualization, like, I can flip through literally a half a dozen characters and view their interludes as being recontextualizations, because, like, you already mentioned, so like Imp, Regent, Rachel. I mean, interestingly, all three Undersiders off the top of my head, they're characters where you kind of thought you knew what was going on with them until you saw from inside their head.
Right.
And you realized that you were wrong about them in some fairly substantial ways, although it's not like anything you learned like contradicted their behavior. It was just like, oh, that is why they're like that.
Right.
And that's, and then I mean, Bonesaw was one of them too, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the interludes, that's the function of the interludes in the story. And I think it ties into the fact that we're in Taylor's point of view, and everything we see is very Taylor centric because we're seeing the world through her eyes, and we're seeing things and people and events the way she sees them. And then we get to step back and we get to jump into somebody else's head. Kind of, we're in third person in these interludes, but, and we get to see things from their perspective, and it changes things. I like that a lot because I think not only are we learning more about these characters and recontextualizing them, yes, but I think this also serves as like an indication for us, the reader, that like to not take everything Taylor says as fact, or and realize that you're in her head and you're being influenced by the way she thinks. And I think that's a pretty good way of illustrating the fact that, hey, things are not always the way Taylor sees them and always the way Taylor thinks about them. Yeah,
right. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the cognitive bias of the fundamental attribution error, where, you know, you see a guy who you maybe know slightly, like walk into the break room of the office, like not say hi to you, slam the refrigerator, storm out, and you think like, oh, what an asshole, what an angry person.
Yeah.
And like what you don't realize is like someone just like sideswiped their car and drove off or something, and like anyone would act that way in that situation. And like that's something we do in real life, and it's something we definitely do in stories where we impute on the other characters, particularly when we have a biased point of view character, all sorts of motives that they don't necessarily have. And especially when you're in a Wild Bow story and all the characters are imagined complexly, they're guaranteed not to have simplistic motives.
Yeah, because everyone's going through something. Everyone's going through some shit, and that influences the way they behave. And you can't fully understand that until you see things from their perspective.
Yeah.
As far as best written, you know, it's tough to say that to declare this as not being recency bias, but I really do feel like part of the fun in reading Worm was kind of watching Wildbow's growth as a writer during the course of it. We talked a few times about how like he slowly seemed to be more confident in not only his characters, but how he describes action and how he does dialogue and how he, you know, shows things from Taylor's point of view. So I really feel like by the end of the story, some of the best writing I saw in Wildbow was the end and the last two arcs itself. The epilogue, I think some of the moments in the epilogue are just beautifully written. I think Spec, that arc, is a testament to his skill as a writer, because he's basically challenging himself here. He's basically setting up a character whose head we've been in the whole time, and we have to slowly see her change into something else. And he's got to show us that slowly but realistically. And I just think it's just so wonderful.
Yeah. I definitely loved the ending of the story. I do have to just make like an honorable mention, call out to the Alec interlude. I think that was maybe the first time in the story where I was like, this is my favorite. And then I subsequently said that about several more interludes. But the Alec interlude is very special because I feel like there's a degree of subtlety present that is extremely impressive, and it communicates, the way it's written communicates so much about the character that it's one of the perfect examples of like the character doesn't really know what's going on with himself, but the writing still manages to convey what's going on under the surface.
Yeah.
And that's like a master level skill right there.
Yeah, that's really hard to do because you're playing, you're like spinning plates. Like there is so much stuff going on. You have to construct the scene as it's seen from the character's point of view. You construct the basis of the scene as we can understand. And then you have to hint at that third layer that these are things happening that he is not aware of, but you need to be aware of, but not totally, not to where it's like just completely revealing, but where it's under the surface to where you can see where he's avoiding it, but, and almost where he might have a little bit of self-realization, but not enough. And it's really, really, really hard to do.
Yeah. That's, yeah. So yeah, in terms of the big, oh shit moments.
So many.
Yeah. Right. I think those are, if anything, I think most people are going to agree on what those are. Like, basically anything having to do with big cauldron reveals or Scion reveals, or like important interludes from,
every time
Scion.
Every time Taylor killed someone, that was my oh shit moment.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's next question. From Koala's DLP. What do you think Taylor would do differently if given the chance?
Everything. No, I mean, I think she says it, right? I think she says in that final moment in Arc 30 that she would spend less time propping up the really bad people or emulating the really bad people and spend time on the really good people. And I think we hinted towards Golem, and you said something beautiful about Golem's role as being the person to remember the dead, and she's kind of indicating, maybe not explicitly, but in your head that's one of the more important things. And I think so. I think she would. I think the Taylor is such a complicated character that the things that she does, I don't think a lot of the big desires would change. Like her desire to save the world, her desire to have friends and find acceptance, and all these things would change. But I think I don't know if she would latch quite onto this ruling through fear thing that she held onto for so long in the first half of the story. I don't think she would probably go that route.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's certain aspects of who she is that aren't clear to her until the end, even if then. Like, it takes her a really long time to admit that it's important to her that she be powerful and in charge and doing something significant. Even though, throughout the whole story, she consistently makes decisions that she would only make if being powerful and in charge were a priority for her. So that's the kind of thing where if she knew that when she was starting out, she might pay more attention to working on that tendency in herself.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, next one from Ember Rising. So yeah, this is a good opportunity for us to discuss the Leviathan dice roll idea.
The thing that everyone wanted me to know throughout the entire story. Anytime there was a question and answer, are you going to tell Scott about the Leviathan dice rolls?
Yeah. So sorry everyone. Scott knew about this. I think either before or just after reading Arc 8.
Yes.
And we just decided that this is one of the many things that we didn't want to talk about because it isn't textual. It's really interesting, and that's why we're going to talk about it now.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Wildbow basically had his character list, and he I don't know how he did it exactly, but he rolled dice to determine who would live and who would die in this fight out of everyone fighting. And I think there was some there was some wiggle room, like, the triumvirate I think probably had some really high, modifier, or however you want to do that, because it would kind of strain the story a little bit if you killed off someone who was depicted as having been in 50 Endbringer fights, and being invulnerable and so forth. But everyone was on the table, and in fact, my understanding is that Taylor was given a penalty. Taylor was supposed to die, and Aegis was supposed to live and be the new protagonist, or the new main point of view character, however you want to view that. And apparently Aegis rolled really poorly and Taylor rolled really well. And so the tail swipe that would have killed Taylor just paralyzed her. and that was that was history. I think this is yet another example of this idea of Wildo being able to handle kind of like what ifs, because he had the confidence in his story, in his world, that he knew he could work in pretty much any combination of different characters living and dying and have it still work, which it sure did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it shows that this ends up being Taylor's story, but that it didn't necessarily have to be. And I think it's fun to play these what ifs, and I think that's really cool, and I like that he did it that way a lot. And I wonder what the story with Aegis as the protagonist looks like. I wonder how different things are and how different things end up. But yeah, I mean, it shows confidence. It shows commitment to the world and to the realism that he's created. And it's really cool. And I understand why everyone wanted me to know about it, because it's this really cool little detail that, yeah, your main character, the one that you love so much, the one that you were so happy at the end of the epilogue that she finally gets some semblance of peace and maybe someday a road to happiness. She could have just died, just a tail swipe. She could have been dead.
Yeah, it would have been more obvious that this was going to be a tragic story if that were the case.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of what this story's reputation would be if that were the case, though. I mean, imagine if it were popular, but this was a story where the character you think of as the protagonist just dies.
Yeah. And 8 arcs into the story is not. I mean, it's a 30 arc story, so that's a pretty significant portion of the story that you think you've finally started to get into a rhythm, and you think the book has finally kind of taught you what it's going to be. And then it throws you for a loop there. Yeah.
That's it. I mean, it's really fascinating. And I think, yeah. I mean, but you could talk about it all day, but I think that for now we'll just kind of acknowledge it and say we think it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Next question from another from Ember Rising. I'm sorry, wrong question. From Sendatsu Yoshimitsu. Basically, yeah. So related to the last question, this idea that there's a word of God that at different points the travelers in Guts and Glory, aka Panacea and Glory Girl, were going to be more central or protagonists of the story. Just kind of an opportunity to address that. I mean, I think it's almost clear that the travelers could stand to be a bigger part of the story, because he wrote a whole arc that was just the traveler's backstory, basically. And I imagine that could have gone, in different directions from there.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's easy for me to believe.
You can see a version of this book where the travelers are our protagonists, and they are our entry point into this world, that they get tossed into this new world and they have to learn all about it, and thus allowing us to learn all about it through them. You can see that's a very typical story structure in the fantasy sci-fi genre. When you're dealing with things that we aren't aware of, you usually have characters who are not aware of them either as an entry point, and you can see that happening. You can see the story structured that way. I think it would have worked great, but that's not the way he decided to go with it, and that's cool.
It's a really good point, because they would have come into Brockton Bay and they probably would have met the Undersiders, and that would have been very interesting. That's a fun idea. I think, especially if Krauss were the point of view, he's much more unlikable than Taylor, actually.
Yes,
so
just a little bit,
little rough. But,
yeah.
All right. Next question from Wolf Tamer 9. Why didn't the entities fill in the blank for employ some other solution to solve their problem of basically surviving the ultimate heat death of the universe, if you will, rather than going the intergalactic omnicide route? and I have an answer to this, which is that the entities are slaves to natural selection. They don't actually have freedom of action. Even Eden, the thinker, is only really given, freedom to solve the specific problem laid out for her. She doesn't have she would essentially have to fight her companion if she wanted to do anything other than continue the cycle as the cycle has been laid out. That's their life cycle. They're even more slaves to their nature than humans are, and humans are pretty bad at being slaves to our nature. That's my interpretation of this, is that like the entities may be super intelligent, but that doesn't mean that they have any incentive or particular desire to solve the problem in any other way than the way natural selection has kind of led them to.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good and reasoned and intelligent response. My response is, because this is the way that it happened. And like I understand, like this is a book that where motivation and understanding is very central to everything. But at a certain point in any kind of narrative, you have to just be willing to accept that it happens this way because it happened this way. And like I kind of shudder involuntarily sometimes when I hear these "why didn't X do Y" questions. Not because I think they're bad questions, just because I don't. Sometimes I just don't know how to answer it, other than because that's not the way it happened in this story, and sometimes that has to just be sufficient.
Yeah, particularly when it's science fiction and it's like, look, okay, not to get too big picture here, but like someone in one of the threads made the great comment that Worm is a reconstruction of the superhero genre, meaning you take the idea of people running around in masks and having superpowered battles, and you say, okay, how do I make this actually make sense? And that's like one of the things that I said from the very beginning I appreciated about Worm, is that it's like takes a logical, like really fun science fiction explanation that makes the ridiculousness of superhero genre make sense. And so like those are your boundary conditions. Your boundary condition is you have to end up with superheroes. So, it's kind of fighting the purpose of the whole thing. If you say like, well, why didn't they do it a different way? It's like, well, then they wouldn't have ended up with superheroes, which is actually where we were trying to go with this.
Right. So, right. I mean, it's why sometimes like the word contrived is nails on a chalkboard word for me when dealing with narrative and stories, because like everything is contrived. This is a book is a contrived narrative. That's what it is. And you try your best to give character and reason and explanations behind some actions. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's this way because that's the way it needed to be for the story to function as the story that Wild Bill wanted it to be.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, you do your best to make it feel organic. That's all you can really do. All right, next question from Sargon86. From a utilitarian viewpoint, did Cauldron fail because they created Grey Boy? Yes.
Yes. Short answer, yes. And that's that gets into the whole point with this thing, with this the greater good reasoning behind all this stuff, that like in your efforts to save the world, you created something so much worse than all that. Like the idea of eternal pain is so much worse for, I mean, not in the large viewpoint, but like for the individual that have to go through eternal pain, that is inexcusable and awful and terrible. And they did that in their efforts to save the world.
Right. Like literally billions of years of suffering, basically.
Yeah. Which
is basically like morally equivalent to snuffing out a planet, basically. I mean, you can make the argument.
Yeah.
Each time he does it, by the way.
Each time. Yeah, not just... Yeah.
Right.
Who knows how many people he did. I don't know if we get any kind of numbers as to how often he's done that, but it's more than one.
Yeah. Right. All right. Next question from Cogito3. Do you think Taylor's motivations changed throughout the story, or did they stay at bottom the same, with only manifestations changing?
That's a really good question. And I think the answer is yes and no. I think the base motivations that inspired Taylor to summon those spiders and make her costume led her from page 1 to page 5,000, whatever it is.
Yeah.
those base motivations and that base underlying trauma and desire, yes, but I mean, she did change. Like her motivation shifted. Like the early Taylor is very interested in finding a place to belong and a place where she can fit in and like getting away from the things that drive her like to misery. And later Taylor is very focused on saving world. So I mean that there is things about her that change. There is motivations that change, but I think the like he says that the underlying deep core central trait of her is driving her from point one to the end.
Yeah. I mean, what makes this great is that Taylor has a very unrealistic level of lack of self-awareness for someone her age. So when you say motivation, it's like, especially when you're that age, but even for adults, you're rarely aware of your like actual motivations for why you do anything practically. So like the core of her that probably only comes out in therapy sessions probably was the same the whole time. But like in terms of her justifications, those changed chapter by chapter. And I think it's good that there's that dichotomy between those two things. That's good storytelling, good character. All right, next. From Starlight at Dusk, what is your favorite unconfirmed theory?
I forgot who said it and when, but there was one person who said in the moments before Scion's death, he like used his path to victory power and just asked, how do I make the pain stop? And it just told him, don't move, stand still when the bolt that Foil fires at him hits him. And I kind of love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Right. As soon as I saw that, I thought that was fantastic. Yeah. I like any theory that implies that the mysterious third entity, Abaddon, is the fan name.
I'm sorry. What was? I don't think that's the right name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it All the Berries?
No, it's Oops All Berries.
Oh, Oops All Berries. Yeah. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah. The implication that Oops All Berries intentionally sabotaged Fuckster rather than that just being like an accident. That's my favorite theory that is completely unconfirmed.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Next story from Calinero 985. What death hit you the hardest? For me, it was Clock Blocker. Because of how it was delivered, mainly. Like I like Dennis and I like Clock Blocker as a character, but like the way you're just like, oh, that's his ghost, and then it takes an extra beat to hit you, and it's just so like, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I think Regent for me. My first answer prior to epilogue would have been Danny, because that really screwed me up. And then it turned out to maybe not be true. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe. No. But yeah, Regent really, cause I like it. It's such a wonderful scene, and it's such a like dramatic, like holy shit moment. And I don't know. It really fucked me up, cause this was this character that I both liked and hated at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Next question from Liquid Metal Cobra. So Liquid Metal Cobra helpfully points out that I have called like 4 or 7 or 11 different arcs my favorite arc, and probably said the same thing about individual interludes and chapters, and basically is saying, hey, so what's your actual favorite arc, chapter, line, etc. And so my answers are, my favorite arc is the Traveler's arc. I just love this as like a short story, a deep dive into this one other really interesting character, who isn't Taylor, but gets a lot of attention spent on them. My favorite chapter, I think I'm going to just say it's the Regent chapter, because I just keep going back to that one, the Regent interlude. My favorite line is either finally everyone was working together or the last few lines of the story. I can't really decide between those.
Cool. My favorite arc is Spec, Arc 30. We talked about this before, but it's kind of the culmination of both the story and I think Wildbow's skill as a writer. This was really complicated and hard to do in a way that kept it interesting throughout every chapter in the arc. And I thought he nailed it. My favorite chapter is, originally I wrote down 20.5, the cafeteria scene chapter, because I really, really love that. But I changed my mind halfway through writing it out, and the chapter that has stuck with me the most throughout my entire time with the story is chapter 6.9, when Taylor goes home, starts writing the letter to Miss Militia to explain everything, and then decides to leave her father behind and burn that letter, or the start of the letter when she writes, "I am a supervillain," and then lets that burn. That image, that scene has stuck with me throughout this entire thing. I think it is fantastically well written. I think it is kind of the culmination of Taylor's arc up until that point. It's tragic, but it's also empowering for her in that moment. And I just love it. I still love it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of, the reason I keep saying that there's a lot of, like, the reason I keep saying, oh, this is my favorite, is like, depends on which Matt you're talking to, you know, like, like the chapter where she kills Alexandria is my favorite some days, right? Like, do I have to be consistent? I don't.
Never.
I don't
my favorite movie changes every 10 minutes. So no, You do not have to be consistent.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's my favorites right now.
Yeah.
Ask me again next week.
Yep.
So another question from Liquid Metal Cobra: to what extent do you think your experience, specifically you, Scott, was affected by reading the story one arc at a time?
A whole lot. I think, it's weird because, like, I read it in not necessarily the way the story was supposed to be read, because, like, I think there's two ways that people will find themselves reading this story. Either they were with it from the beginning and they read it 2 chapters a week for 2.5 years, right? That's how long it went on.
Think so.
Or they came in at the end and speed read through everything, and just like you did. And I'm kind of in between those things. And I think reading it arc by arc really allowed me to see, like, that each arc was built with structure behind it, that like, I think one of my most favorite things we did throughout the run of this podcast was when we used that first chapter as a window into what the theme of the arc was going to be. And in some chapters, it's a lot more clear than other ones. But I think that this structure allowed me to see that there's a reason why we divide things into arcs. Arcs aren't just nebulous, meaningless divisions of things, that they have purpose behind them, and they have a connecting event, a connecting theme behind them. And reading it arc by arc allowed me to experience this. Yeah,
I mean, like, just to take the most superficial example, like, I didn't spend an iota of thought on the arc titles when I was reading the first time, and it's obvious, completely obvious in retrospect, that every single arc title is like the thematic, thesis statement, if you will, of that arc.
Mm-hmm.
And it binds the whole thing together, and then the whole arc is like a story, right? None of that is obvious if you don't read it, paying attention to that and reading it slowly. And I know I've said this before, but, like, this whole podcast is like an accidental gold discovery, because I love this story, and I was like, this is a really great story, this will be a good project. But I didn't even realize how good the story was. That's so weird to say. Like, it wasn't until we were a few arcs in digging into it, and I was like, oh shit, this is really good. Like, and I was the one who, like, introduced you to it. So it's funny how all of the stuff that was making me love it I was not consciously aware of it at all. It was
yeah. That's I think we're going to get into that a little more, but I think that's what one of the things that this project has taught me, that, like, there are reasons why you like a story. There are always reasons why you like something, but it is very difficult a lot of times to really dive down into the structural, the specific reason why it's working for you. And that is what we tried to do. And as the deeper we dove, the more we found. And I think that is so fundamentally satisfying. And I think that's why you guys like listening to this, because like, you like it. And there's a lot of, a lot of surface level stuff you can point to for why you like something. But when you really dive down into it, you start to see exactly why things work the way they do. And that was the arc by arc structure that we kind of unknowingly stumbled into, because we just said, well, why don't we just divide it like this? Because that makes sense. Right. Really helped us understand that, and get to the accomplishment of the objectives we set in front of us. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Next question. Last question from Liquid Metal Cobra. How would you adapt the agnosia fog scene to a film medium? Yeah, I think we touched on this right after it happened, and I thought about it a bit in the months after that, and I still think the best way to do it is you keep the camera centered directly on Taylor, and you make everything like confused and muffled and dark, and you kind of just focus on Taylor's face, and like you make it. People see the movie Mother? Anyone see Mother? I still haven't. Okay. Well, in Mother, the camera is like fixed on Jennifer Lawrence the entire time. It's different. It's varying closeness, close-ups, extreme close-ups. Like even if it's a medium shot, it's a medium where she's in the center of the frame, and the camera is fixed on her, and it's disorienting. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't like that movie, because it's just like so disorienting, and so many things are happening around her that you can't fully see and understand because you're so fixed on her. And I think that's the way you do it. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I was like, my riff actually on your idea would be like, the shot is either on Taylor's face as she's talking to people out of frame whose voices are distorted, or it's behind her head, but the focus is on the back of her head, and the people you see in her field of view are like well out of focus to the extent that you can only sort of see their coloring. Yeah. That would be, and then like you basically just switch between those two. At most you might get like a distant shot where you can't see any details, but I think you could basically, there's all kinds of tricks that you could use to make it not only work, but actually be pretty cool, I think. I mean, one of the things you could also do is just like turn into the skit a little bit and just have it be dramatic irony to where the audience knows who these people are, but it's very clear that your main character doesn't. And then a lot of the tension is derived from the fact that we know and she doesn't, and seeing how that's going to play out. So you could just admit that it's hard to do and just go into it that way. Right. Because basically there's only the one chapter. Right. Where you really don't know it's them. And then you are fairly suspicious it's them all the way to knowing it's them pretty quickly after. So, yeah. All right. Oh, yeah. I like this question. Tinky Forecast asks, when did you know this story was something special? Chapter 1. No, I'm kidding. I mean, did we ever tell the story of how we decided to do this? I don't remember. I don't know if we've done it or not. You basically, for how many years? 3 years, had been telling me, Scott, you should read this book, and bring it up in podcasts every time we talked about anything to do with superheroes. And I finally said, hey, maybe we could like analyze this book, because I had been listening to a lot of podcasts in the same kind of vein that really analyze literature. And I thought we had something to say and could do something fun with that. And this seemed like a good project. And you said, read the first arc, and if you like it, we'll do it. And so that's what I did. I went down and I read the first arc. I was on an airplane, and then I landed and texted you and said, let's do it. So it's not completely false to say that I knew it was something right away, but I think that the first time it really hit me that this is going to not just be a fun project with a book I enjoy, but something that will stay in my life forever, was around my favorite chapter, which is chapter 6.9. or the first time that we blew up the 2-hour mark and left that behind, when I realized we had so much to say that 2 hours was never going to be achievable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I think, man, it's a really fun question to think about. Like, answering it is almost boring compared to just thinking about like, what is the moment? And I think like my conclusion after thinking about it for a bit was like there's different points in the story that hit you with different degrees of this is special. Like a relatively minor one you could say would be like in I think arc 5 there's the big villain meeting, and that's the first time for me that I like realized, oh, this is getting really complex, and there's all these really interesting characters playing off each other and I'm like completely like bought into this story in a way that really rarely happens, you know. And yeah, there's probably a dozen little points on the way to the point when things go full sci-fi with the Travelers and then horror with the Nine, and like the genre shifts are one thing that hit you as being like, oh, this is new. Where are we going with this?
Yeah, I like that answer a lot, actually, because I think there are moments throughout the entire story that you realize, wow, this is something special. This is something different. This is something great. You're absolutely right. And it continues like the story's continued ability to surprise me, even as we rounded the finish line, like really it sticks in my brain. It really does. Like the first time we had the Entity arc, what ended up being Scion's backstory, was like this moment of serious like holy shit, and that's late in the story, and like you're like, this continues to surprise and delight, and that is special. Normally, especially someone who's, and I don't want to say this negatively or anything, but someone who's read as many stories as I have, like you find your ability to like pick up on what the thing is going to do pretty quickly. Like you're like, I know what this is about. I know where this is going. I know what it's going to do. So the ability to surprise is kind of treasured to me. And I don't know. I loved it.
Right. I mean, yeah. Yeah. You mentioned a few minutes ago, like how I bring this up all the time, but like how I used to bring up Worm all the time in context of other superhero conversations. And like, that's because like after you've seen it done really well, it's really hard to just forget that and go back to what you see as being a very kind of shallow approach, which I feel is how most, I mean, if you listen to our podcast where we talk about other superhero movies, the kind of the best thing I'll ever say is like, yeah, it was really fun, which is completely valid in a way of enjoying something. But like, I'm never going to say like, oh, it blew my mind, because it can't. Yeah. Okay. So next question. What do you think of the deaths of this story? Who do you think had the most tragic death, the most heroic death, the least deserved death, the most emotional death?
So for me, the most tragic is my boy Brian. We talked about this a bit when we realized he was good and dead, but I think his story is so tragic. It doesn't have, there's no clean resolution for him. It's just kind of, you had a rough life, and then this terrible thing happened to you, and you were just never really able to get past it. And then you died. The end. And that's rough, but it's also real. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you don't have this nice, clean arc to finding a better version of yourself. Sometimes the world has other plans for you, and that's really tragic. Yeah. How about you?
So I'm gonna go last, because all three of mine are the same.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna say okay. The most heroic then is Regent. I loved his death. I loved how I loved that character change, and I love how he got there. And it was just this moment of heroism that I just did not expect to happen, and really, really hit me.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
least deserved is a tough thing because I don't like. Like, I don't know how to answer that really. Like, I don't know who least deserved to die. I guess like, is Dauntless the one that's in the time bubble?
Yeah,
that's a bummer.
Yeah.
So I didn't like. You don't know anything about these are very minor bit characters, so it just kind of sucks. So I guess that.
Right. Right. That's the thing is like. So like the one that always pops out to me is like the poor guy who, from his point of view, he's like defending his family from monster dogs, and then Rachel comes in and like crushes his legs, and then Siberian comes in and like stabs him through the eye sockets into his brain.
Jesus, yeah, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, so it's like that's probably the least deserved to me. I think like I want to talk about Blasto actually because he had just the most like kicking the puppy tragic like oh god, just let him die.
Yeah,
and also true. Like and also it happened because he was being heroic. Like he had the option of basically standing aside and sort of like chose to try to stand up to Bonesaw. Didn't work out for him, but he tried.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So that was my most tragic and most heroic.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. The most emotional for me was Taylor. Until she wasn't dead anymore. But still, like, I still think back that last chapter and thinking that she actually could be gone. And that was rough, man.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. Like, I think like after reading that many words and that, like, just the depth of connection you feel to that character, you just kind of walk around in a stupor until you get some closure on that. Which,
can confirm. That's what I did.
For you, that was longer than for most people, unfortunately. Yeah. All right, next question from Green Door 65 again. Do you think Worm deserves to be labeled as grimdark? Why or why not?
And see, this is another one of our things where we start arguing definitions, right?
Yeah.
How do you define grimdark? And if you Google it, Google says grimdark is particularly violent, dystopian, and amoral. And while I agree that Worm is certainly violent and certainly dystopian, I don't think Worm is an amoral story. In fact, I think morality and how that plays out is kind of at the central of what the story is about. So by that definition, no.
Yeah. Like grimdark, like I know it's supposed to be a Warhammer 40K reference, but like for me, what I always think about is like those really over the top violent, like Batman or like Sabretooth comics from like the early 90s where it was basically like snuff comics. Like it's just like unpleasant. Just the only appeal of it was like, let's see how disgustingly violent we can make this. And it's very little like value to me, and that's not at all what Worm is to me.
Yeah. I associate grimdark with nihilism, and I don't know if that's fair, but I kind of do. And I don't think Worm is nihilistic. I don't think the story ends the way it does if this was a completely nihilistic story. So I would not call it grimdark.
Yeah.
But like any other word in the world of the internet, that word has been used over and over again to the point where it's almost meaningless now.
Yeah.
And it's just a feeling. The definition of grimdark is the way you feel about what grimdark is. And so some people were probably going to say, no, it totally is because I think grimdark's this. But yeah.
Right. As usual, I'm already bored of arguments about definitions. So, I like, from Frustrated Free Buddha. I said your name right this time. What was your favorite "sorry, what" line in the story?
It's when Taylor shot a baby in the face, Matt. It's when Taylor shot a baby. I don't even think the story says it was in the face. I've just decided that that's where she shot the baby.
Right.
Because it's a very small baby. It's being held by someone. So, face.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to this.
because your answer is baby murder.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the clock blocker one was a double take. The clock blocker ghost one. Yeah, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I mean, there's definitely. So, like, I'm not. I think most people don't get you needed where the opponents immediately. Like, I don't think anyone gets it immediately, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you read it a few times, and for me, I was basically like, all right, I'm just gonna keep reading because I'm sure the story will explain this to me. Yeah. So yeah, I guess you could call that a sorry what line.
Yeah.
I guess you could say, like, when the ambulance or whatever PRT van brings back what Taylor thinks is a dead body of one of her teammates to the
that's
PRT. Like, you're just like, oh, but like I distinctly remember, like, and it says, like, Taylor goes cold. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, I went cold. Like, like I was ready to kick somebody's ass, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, Alexandria
good,
dying herself is a pretty big sorry what line. You're like, wait,
yeah.
wait, what? Hold on, what?
Yeah, Alexandria.
Yeah.
All right, King Bob 12 asks, favorite character arc.
So we kind of talked about this already.
Yeah.
And my answer is Rachel, but I wanted to leave this in because, Matt, there was a thread in the Reddit over the week, because I get to check that now, Matt. I'm allowed to check that now, about what was Wildbow's worst written character.
Oh God,
which was just a wonderful thread of so many people saying things that were wrong. And I'm going to answer this question with Panacea, because even though my answer is Rachel, I'm going to answer with Panacea because someone said, and like 50 people upvoted it, that said that Panacea Amy was a poorly written character, and no.
Yeah, I think the argument was that she didn't, like, completely munchkin her power, which is her character. Like, I don't know what people think characters are sometimes.
And my main...
This isn't Dungeons and Dragons.
You're not going to min-max your power when you're a scared, traumatic teenage girl who is going through an emotional breakdown, like, as we watch her. Like, that's just Sansa
Stark thing again, where it's confusing. I don't like this character, for this is a badly written character.
Right. And that's... I use this whole question to go on this rant, and I'm so glad we get to do it, because that's what I saw throughout that thread over and over again, was people confusing badly written for I don't like what they did, I don't like the decisions they made, or the decision Wildbow made for them. That does not mean it was a poorly written decision. That just means you don't like it. And that's two different things. And to their credit, there were some people in that thread that answered things that I would agree with, that I don't think we need to go through here. But Amy not curing Glory Girl in the moment where she's going through an emotional breakdown and, like, trying to fix her and only making it worse, and, like, losing her mind because she's, like, breaking her rule and, like, trying to fix it and she can't do it, and every time she tries she messes up a little more and it just gets worse and worse and worse. That is not poorly written. That is who Amy is. And no 50 people that upvoted that. No.
I don't have anything to add. That was incorrect.
So thanks, King Bob, for letting me go on my rant. I don't know if that's what you expected from your question, but that's where we took it.
Yeah. I mean, I like Imp's character arc. That's because you just really don't expect it. You know, it's like a very novel kind of arc to me. Like, I always appreciate it when there's something I just haven't seen before. And like I said I like Defiance arc, but Defiance, like, asshole who's redeemed. I mean, there's nuance there, obviously, but, like, it's kind of an archetype. Like, Imps, I can't really fit that to any archetype personally. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Good answer.
All right, expert eye rollinger asks, what epilogue would you have liked?
I would have liked to have seen Golem again and see how he was doing in the result of the Gold Morning. Is that what we call it?
Yeah.
Gold Morning. Okay. Or I would have liked to see Amy. We got some hints at what was going on with Amy in the teacher interlude, but I would have liked to see her again because she's a really well-written character.
Yeah. I think I would go with Golem. Yeah, I agree. I wanted to see more from what was going on with that guy. Okay, from Burn Victim 42, what actors would play various characters?
I'm so bad at these games. I can never think of the right people. And then someone will point it out to me. I was like, oh, that's great. Why didn't I think of that? So the only way I know how to answer this question is by saying you have to hire teenagers that look like teenagers. Like you have to. Like there's the tendency in some of these teen works to hire like 27-year-old people to play 15-year-old kids. I'm looking at you, Dawson's Creek. And you can't do that with this. Like them being young is so important to their character and the things that they go through that they have to look young.
Yeah. So that's one thing I commented a million years ago, probably under a different handle, actually, now that I think of it. But like my thought was actually someone was making the point of like Taylor needs to be a 15-year-old, 5'10", with shoulder-length black hair and a slightly wide mouth. And I'm like, no, actually. No. Taylor could be played by a, blonde, 5 foot, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, it has to be someone who can convey Taylor's character this, like, kind of cold, internalized ruthlessness, yet still somehow likable. Like, you have to be able to nail that, and that's what's going to be much harder to find than someone who looks like how Taylor's described. So
yes, I completely agree. A lot of times with fan casting, we go, let's marry the physical looks, and it is so much more than that. Every time we talk about this, I go back to the internet losing its mind about Heath Ledger as the Joker, because it's the best example of when everyone was wrong.
Yeah.
Including myself. I will cop to that. I thought that was stupid. And I will never do that again. And that I learned an important lesson through that casting, that you have to get someone who has the presence of the character, not just the looks of the character. And yeah. I would much rather you bend on the looks than you bend on the ability to convey that presence.
Yeah. I don't really have any good answers to this question. Like I don't think my brain works the same way most people do when they're reading, because I barely even picture these people as having faces.
Yeah, we talked about that before. I do it the same way. There's an emotion attached to the character, not a physical view of them in my head.
Right. All right. So next question from Burn Victim 42. Where does the Simurgh plot end? And I thought this was a good question, because like you can get, especially in any story where there's like prophecy and future sight, you can get in this space where things start to feel meaningless, because you're like, oh, it doesn't matter, this is all the will of the Force or whatever. But I've actually changed my mind about this recently, specifically after rereading and kind of studying it wasn't the Simurgh interlude, but it's the part where you're kind of seeing into the Simurgh's head, and she is basically thinking about how not omniscient she is. Like she throws a stone into darkness, or she throws a stone, period, and 99% of the, I mean, she doesn't think of it this way, but my interpretation is like 99% of the time, the billiard ball that she throws is going to hit the thing that she aimed at. And then 99% of the time that ball ricochets at her next target, it's going to result in the outcome that she wanted. And then 99% of the time after that, but you see, each collision has a little bit of error baked into it. And you get enough collisions, you get enough causal connections away, and her control is practically non-existent. Otherwise, the whole world will just be a clockwork, wound up by the Simurgh, which it clearly isn't.
Yeah.
So that's my like, this story is not just entirely 100% a Simurgh plot justification.
Yeah, I agree with you. We've got a few questions on these and a few comments on this throughout, about the idea of free will versus determinism in this story and what the story is saying. And I think like I think it's narratively boring to just say that this was all just a plot of the Seamerg and a result of Dinah, because it removes choice from your characters, and if your characters don't have choice, they don't have agency, and then they're boring and flat. And that's obviously not the case. Our characters make choices. Our characters have things that happen to them, and they react to them in certain ways. And I think it's overly simplistic to write it all off as just influenced by these precogs. It's too simplistic, and I'm not saying that they didn't have some bearing on the way things played out. They very clearly did, but I don't think Worm is a study of free will versus determinism. I think it's in the story, but I don't think that the idea of the story is to explore specifically the difference between those two things and how they shake out. And if that's not what the story is trying to do, then by saying that, oh, this was all just a plot of the Seamerg, it seems to contradict the point of the novel.
Yeah, I agree with you, particularly because we have this explicit story element that when you have multiple precogs kind of stepping on each other's toes, they mess up each other's results. And that just suggests that there's no such thing as like God's eye precog. Even Contessa, who arguably has like kind of the most broken power, it has blind spots. Okay, cool. So next question from Sage of Stupidity. Has Worm changed your view of the superhero genre?
Yes and no. I think this gets into something you talked about earlier, which is that Worm is a reconstruction of the genre. And I like that a lot because I think if you go back and listen, I think I even called it a deconstruction early in the plot. And that's because at the get, it kind of seems like that. It kind of seems like it has an element of we're going to break down all the individual aspects of the genre and look at why they're dumb or stupid or how we can twist them. But it's not that. It is not that. It is exactly what you said. It is, let's make these elements in a genre that is at its surface kind of silly. I mean, you have people in underpants, like with magic powers fighting each other. Like that there's something inherently silly about that. Let's take this and find a way to make it work. And Worm absolutely does that. And yes, I will be comparing every superhero thing I see to the story, but I also think you have to go back to what the person is trying to do. I think Ebert said a movie or a story is not about what it's about, it's how it's about it. And I think that is so important when looking at stories that Marvel comics and films and are not trying to do the same thing that Worm is trying to do. So to judge them the same way, I don't think is fair to those things. But yeah, it's going to be hard not to say, well, Worm did it this way in the back of your head somewhere when you're watching or reading these things.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's a few places where, like, man, I hate to call out a specific movie, but like the Avengers, Captain America, to the big one, the most recent one, what was that called? Civil War. Yeah. Like, it's funny because I like was gushing about that movie when it came out, but then like it hasn't aged well in my mind. And I think a lot of it is like, it was kind of trying to be a little bit serious. And it's like, if you're going to be serious, I've seen Worm now. So I need you to be serious in a way that I can swallow, because like the other direction is my favorite superhero movie, Spider-Man 2 with Tobey Maguire, which is not serious at all, really. I mean, it takes the emotion and the drama seriously, but it also embraces the, like, this is Spider-Man. He swings around in his underpants, and we're gonna have fun with that. So that's like the perfect straddling that line for me in the opposite direction of not making it, realism focused.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, and I love that movie, and I will continue to love that movie. But yeah, I mean, it is hard not to make those comparisons.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Yeah, we can talk for a second. From Microburst, points out that the final line of chapter 30.4 was removed. It used to be, "I turn my attention to Scion."
And so the final line is now finally everyone was working together, right?
Yeah, right. I believe so.
Yeah. So that's something that Wildbow removed relatively recently, right?
Yeah, like literally within the last couple months. Yeah,
it's crazy. I think it's so much better.
yeah. I mean, so just the line obviously jumps out when it's the last line.
Yeah,
it still jumped out even when it wasn't the last line, but I just think it lands a lot harder now.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to this wonderful moment at the end of the arc when Taylor says it was never about Scion, it was about us. And this seems to cement that in that the chapter ends with finally everyone was working together, not I turned my attention to Scion. It's not about him. It's not about Scion. Scion is the reason, but he's not the important part. And I think that cements that theory. So I love that it was taken out, actually. I think it works so much better to tie into that thematic end to this was always about us, not him.
Yeah, I agree completely. Also, I think I noticed when I was rereading that exact, like a very similar phrasing to I turn my attention to Scion occurs either elsewhere in that chapter or in the next chapter. And so it's like, it doesn't feel special at all, because it's just like, oh, she's of course she's turning her attention to Scion. It's her enemy. So yeah. Nycroburst also wants us to talk about redemption arcs in Worm. We did that a little bit talking about Defiance. There's a bunch though, actually. There's a bunch.
Yeah. I think we didn't get a lot of direction from Nycroburst here, so I'm just gonna say I think that redemption arcs are one of kind of the, I don't want to say easiest, but they're used a lot in storytelling. Like this idea that we're going to take someone who does something bad and then redeem them. They're used a lot. So it's very, it means something when they're done well.
Yeah.
Because I think they're used so often. And so many stories are about redeeming the main character or redeeming the main character's friend or the antagonist. There was like the talk about Star Wars in this latest trilogy is going to be Kylo Ren's redemption arc, and it doesn't really seem like that's going to be the way anymore. But spoilers. I think that Worm, like I don't even call them, like, I'm trying to think of, this is tough to phrase, but I don't even know if they're all necessarily redemption arcs. Are they just windows into human beings and how human beings operate and how human beings get to a place where they can at least get better? It's not so much about redemption. Like, I don't see Bonesaw being redeemed at the end of the story. I just see her finally in a place where maybe there's hope for her to get better. Like, the thing I love, one of my favorite quotes in the story is when Taylor's standing over the memorial to Alec and saying, like, the good things that you do don't make the bad things go away. And I love that idea. I love that central idea at the heart of this, that you can do all the good in the world, but the bad will still be there. And I think that's Worm's take on redemption, that yeah, you can make choices and move yourself in a positive direction, but the mistakes you made don't just magically disappear because of that. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's vastly more mature than what we normally see. I mean, like, consider Darth Vader throws the Emperor into the shaft, and then Luke saves him successfully. Okay, so now he's a war criminal. And is he contrite? Like, what does he do now? Like, seriously, like, this never even occurs to you. This is like the first time it's occurring to me, and it's just because I'm forcing myself to be like, yeah, it is kind of convenient when you call it a redemption arc when all a person does is they do one good thing and sacrifice themselves. Alex may be the only character in the story who actually dies for someone, and you can sort of call that his redemption arc. Although I think his redemption, in terms of like becoming a better person, actually begins before we even meet him.
Right. I don't think redemption is a light switch. I don't think it's not one moment. It's not one choice. It's a road. And I think that's what Worm does very well. It's like, that's why I love the Valkyrie interlude in the epilogue so much, because we go back to Bonesaw, and we've had Bonesaw as a monster, and then we have her instrumental in assisting in the fight against Scion, but she's not better. Like there's still a part of her that's fundamentally broken, and that's not something that, like, even after you've made that decision that I am going to try to be better, like that's not the end of the road at all. And it's so easy to like, killing off a person in redemption is an easy way to not deal with that, is just to say like, oh, well, now they've done it and now they're dead, so they don't have to go on. they've redeemed themselves, and that's why I love the idea that Taylor is actually, yes, very much alive at the end of the story, because she did not sacrifice herself and then gets to die as the sacrificial redeemed person, because she gave up her power and sacrificed herself. Like, she has to now live with this, and that's the hard road, and that's the tough part. And I love that that's the part that Worm really explores. And even when it seems like Worm is going to give you that typical redemption through Alec, the story almost explicitly says, hey, you're not really redeemed. Like, you still did all those really bad things, but hey, you did good too. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. It's interesting. The story never really answers this question of like, how do you weigh the good things you do and the bad things you do? It's a question. It's not there's no answer.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very personal too. I think it's very much, how do you live with yourself? And with great difficulty in Taylor. The end of the story is so hopeful. It really is, but it is still made very clear that this is a hard road. She has the weight of everything she's done is pushing down on her, and she feels that maybe one day she can just be okay. That's a lot. Yeah, absolutely. All right, next question. I think this was an email. It was
from Andrew, and essentially Andrew is pointing out that I think safe to say that he wishes we had found more time to talk about language, and that he really enjoyed it every time we did, like the water imagery during the Leviathan fight. Basically just focusing down really tightly on like specific word choices and sentences. You go ahead, but I'll just say I agree with him.
Yes, I do too. And I think this comes from our, in retrospect, rather insane schedule that we set up on ourselves. I think when we started this project, we looked and we said, okay, this story has 31 arcs, and it's a nice, neat division for us, and maybe we'll have to do a few double episodes to get through them, but hey, that's good. And I don't think either of us fully realized just how big the later sections would be. I mean, like, it's one thing to look at word counts and be like, okay, this is 70,000 words. But it doesn't fully hit you how much story that is until you start sitting down to like break it out into a podcast. So, I think a lot of that is a result of like, we just didn't have time to really dive down deep into the language all the time. And I think there were parts where stuff jumped out at me or jumped out at you in a way that we're like, okay, we have to talk about this. We have to make time for this because this really jumps out at us and it's really great and we want to talk about it. And so we did, but those were few and far between because we had so much to cover. So Andrew says he hopes that then We've Got Ward, we have more time to do that. And I do too. And I think that because this schedule is 2 to 3 chapters a week instead of 10, I think we will have more time to point out some of those things. We will have more time to really get into the language itself and why we think Wildbow is a great writer of language. I'm really hoping so.
Right. I mean, one thing about the way we did this is we had to do a lot of things which are maybe not even apparent, but like when I'm doing my weekly synopsis, I call it a synopsis, I don't even know if that's the right word. Basically, I'm going through and I'm trying to summarize and relay all of the plot points that I think are essentially like indispensable. Like if like I'm doing triage and saying if I skipped this chunk of paragraphs here, then something will have been like missed for this character's arc, or for an understanding of this aspect of how Taylor's dealing with this, or Taylor's relationship with this character. So like continually having to find this balance of like, okay, this podcast can't last 7 hours, but also I want to make sure that I don't miss any of these things that I'm going to regret missing and are going to like make it so that like kind of the argument or the construction of analysis of the podcast of the story breaks down. And part of that is me being aware that people are listening to this podcast who haven't necessarily read Worm in a while and may not remember what happened in a given chapter. So I'm also having to kind of bring them up to speed. And like this one interesting thing about We've Got Ward is that most people listening will have just read the chapter, and we won't really have to spend a huge amount of time
just summarizing.
Exactly. Yes. Wow, that was a lot of talking to try to say basically that. Yeah, just like we'll spend less time on summarizing and more time on
analysis.
Deep analysis.
Yeah. I absolutely think so. And I like when we first released our plan, I think we kind of said we were going to do like a lighter analysis week by week, and then once an arc done, really dive deep into the arc. I'm kind of in my head walking that back a little bit. I think maybe we'll have like a special bonus at the end of an arc to talk about the themes of the arc as a whole. But I want to be able to dive into this in detail, like chapter by chapter, and really have the time to explore the chapter and explore the language of the chapter and what it's doing and what it's trying to do. And I think that we're going to be able to do that. And I hope that gets into 20-minute conversations where we talk about the difference between the and a, we did that one time. And I really think there's opportunities to do that. And I think we'll just have the bandwidth to be able to do it. So the very, very long-winded answer from both of us to that, Andrew, is yes, that is absolutely our goal going into this new show.
Yeah, I think the reason for the long-windedness is like we enjoy that kind of thing as much as you enjoy listening to it, apparently, and that's a priority for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So now I have a bunch of Word of Gods that I kind of pulled out that no one else had mentioned, so this is just an opportunity. And you know, Scott, some of these you may just want to say cool, and then we can move on. But part of this is like maybe some people listening to this are not aware of some of these, and it'd just be fun to kind of hear them. So
yeah, absolutely.
So very, very, very first, the what I call the witness interlude. So there was an interlude written at the end of not at the end, in the middle kind of the Echidna arc of the Echidna storyline, which is really 2 arcs, and it's from the perspective of a Tattletale clone who eventually names herself Echidna. Witness. And basically this clone is like buried under the rubble with Shatterbird and Noelle, and then Noelle escapes, and then she's stuck under there with just Shatterbird, and we see what it's like to be one of these clones, which I think is cool, not something we got to see in the story. And we learn a lot more about Shatterbird, and basically this story was deleted by Wildbow for a few reasons, I think. But I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on this?
Yeah, this was cool. I liked it a lot. It's always fun to be in Tattletale's head, whether it's real Tattletale or clone Tattletale, because I think the way the prose explains the workings of her power is very interesting to me. You kind of get to see the dots connect themselves as she goes, and I think that's really fun. So getting to see it again is enjoyable. I like how it's structured. I like that it's from her point of view, and I like how we learn about Shatterbird a little bit through her point of view. We learn what happens to Vista, how she gets out of the situation that she was in. And I think it's cool. I think a lot of it is kind of, it's very exposition heavy, which you're in Tattletale's head or Tattletale clone head, so that makes sense. But a lot of this is like Shatterbird explaining her backstory, so Tattletale clone can pick it apart a little bit, which is, it's not. I don't think it was ever dull, but it's also not like the most exciting way to reveal some of this information. But I think you told me before that the reason this was pulled was because of the very end, because the Weld's new Inhumans group, it's Irregulars, right? Inhumans is Marvel. Right. Damn it. Irregulars group brings Witness along with them, and people felt that was unbelievable.
Yeah, that is my understanding. Is that was at least one of the major reasons why this was pulled. There may have been others, like some of the things you're pointing out, but I think that was the main one. Is like basically no way would the Irregulars take on this person when they know that there are echidna clones still around. And my response to that was always, I feel like if Waldo really wanted to, he could have either removed a couple of things or like added a couple of lines explaining why this was more plausible. But like, I don't know, maybe that's a bad instinct on my part.
Yeah, well, and I think this is like Witness joins the Irregulars, and we see the Irregulars kind of go nuts at the end of the story, and it's not confirmed, but I like to think that part of this was fucking Tattletale clone screwing with people and forcing them down a road that she wanted them to go down. So I like this better in the story than I like it out of the story, and I hope it can find its way back in some way.
Right.
I see people's point, but I also think like Weld is like such a fucking nice guy, and he's so willing to help out anyone that's suffering through some of the same stuff he is, that especially someone like Tattletale who can manipulate people so well, to see her as non-threatening. I think it's believable that they would just see her as another Case 53 and want to help her out. Yeah,
I basically agree. I mean, so this is probably a sin of some kind, but like I basically see this as part of the story. Like I know it's not canonical, but I'm like, yeah, but sure it is. I don't know if that's allowed, but I like this enough.
It's allowed. You just did it.
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that's that. I like that quite a bit. As it's not even really Word of God. It's more like just kind of a special little unique thing about web serials that you can have a chapter that gets released and then gets retracted.
Yep. Yep. I wonder how we're going to deal with that if it happens during Ward.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because part of me wants to, like, if an author is going to pull a chapter, it's because he doesn't want the chapter to be out there. And so I am reluctant to cover it as part of normal coverage if that's the case, because you want to respect the wishes of the creator.
Yeah, no, I don't know if there's even a pat answer for that. That's the kind of thing we're going to have to play by ear.
It's going to be fun, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, next one. Jack's trigger event, which I think is interesting in and of itself. And I also want to talk about the fact that recently Waldo has kind of pseudo walked it back. But anyway, so the trigger event was basically that Jack, aka Jacob, had been sealed in a bomb shelter as a child by kind of abusive parents who didn't want to have to take care of him or whatever, and kind of gaslighted over the radio by his parents to believe that the world had ended and it was basically Mad Max / The Road outside. And eventually he gets out somehow and walks out, sees the world is not at all like he thought it was, and his worldview implodes and he triggers. And so I guess first, what do you think of that?
I mean, I think that's really cool. I think it kind of makes sense how his worldview is so warped. That's an insanely cruel thing to do to someone. And I just watched a movie about a similar thing. It's called Brigsby Bear. It's really good.
Oh, interesting.
Watch it.
It's not what I would guess that movie's about from the title.
Yeah, you right? Maybe I just spoiled part of the movie, but no, it's revealed pretty soon. But it's very good, and watch it anyway. I think that's very interesting, and I think it gives some viewpoint into why Jack the way he is, which is good. I don't know if it's necessary. I think it's fine that this is a word of God and not in the story proper. I don't think it's necessary. I think we have a pretty good understanding of who Jack is, that we don't necessarily need to know necessarily why he is that way. It doesn't really change stuff for us, but
yeah, right.
I like it.
It's the kind of thing that's fun to think about. So the one thing I thought was interesting, and this is kind of like a meta comment on like why word of God is a weird area, is he said basically he wished that he had originally said this is the kind of trigger that Jack might have had, instead of saying this was Jack's trigger. And it's like, yeah, I mean, this is fiction that he made up. So
right.
So he can actually, as long as it's not in the story, he can actually change his mind
right.
to that word of God.
And that's why like calling it word of God is a bit of irony on its own. And that's why I kind of feel uncomfortable about some of this. Like, I think it's great that he interacts with his audience. I am worried that every little thing he says about any of his story is going to be taken as gospel and recorded in a database somewhere. Especially when he has shown through the sequel that he's not done in this world yet. So like, I would hate to see like people be up in arms because he changes his mind about something that he said, wouldn't it be cool if it was this way? But then when I was actually constructing my narrative, I realized that I would much rather it be this way. And,
right.
And that's like, it gets into such a gray area. And like, I don't want anyone to feel restricted in their world building by things that they've said in a message board or on a chat channel once, when they were just when they were just shooting the shit with people. And like, I hope he doesn't. And I don't think Wild Bill's the type of person that would, but I mean, it's gotta feel like nerve wracking that you know that every little thing you say about your story, someone's gonna copy paste it somewhere.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would like to say for the record that I encourage, changing your mind about anything that isn't published in
absolutely.
And even then you can edit it, right? Like that's, it's all good. It's all good. This is just a small one. So canonically, Earthbet is more LGBTQ friendly because of legend, specifically, because he's kind of like a high profile guy who kind of was more open about his sexuality earlier in in the timeline than any analogous thing happened in kind of the real Earth timeline. So that was the explanation for that. I thought that was kind of neat.
I think that's really cool, and I think it's true to life that a lot of these things, like they say that the way to become an ally is to have someone in your life that is LGBTQ. My sister is, and like, it's not that I was against any of that beforehand, but like having a person that you know and love and respect and like seeing them go through these things and seeing them have to deal with these things on a very personal level changes a lot of people's opinions about this. There are a lot of very traditionally conservative people that have had a gay person in their family that have changed their mind about these things. And so it's a very true to life realization here. And that's why representation matters.
Yeah.
Yay, Worm, right. For being super diverse.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's cool because like it's not like you were wondering. It's not like you were like reading the story like, why is everyone so LGBTQ friendly? It's just like it was a background fact. It was like there just didn't seem to be a whole lot of stigma at all at any point in the story.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, sure, it's legend. All right,
yeah,
cool. So yeah, I actually like this one. I can't really explain why I find this one so cool, but so the text itself notes that Nilbog is kind of unusual for a cape because once he locked down his territory, he didn't really seek any further conflict. He just didn't want anybody to come into his territory, and that's actually contra to the kind of the purpose of the shards. So the purpose of Nilbog's shard, according to Word of God, is not to harvest conflict, but is rather to create an isolated repository of organisms that can be used as hosts if humanity is wiped out in order to preserve the cycle.
Yeah, that's cool. I kind of wonder if that's like someone came to Wildbow one day and said, "Hey, this doesn't make sense," and he goes, "Oh yeah,
oh yeah."
Well, now it does.
We'll have a science fiction justification.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Boom, got you. Yeah, I mean, I like that he's able to do this. Again, it goes into that world building, but
yeah, I think it's fun.
It is.
All right, next one, Scott. So Parian isn't using her power right. There's a mysterious, true use to Parian's power.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
I think I remember something about how her power was never easy. Like she says, like she always struggled with it. So I guess that makes sense. Yeah,
I mean, like, so basically, like, even from within her point of view, it's kind of implied that, like, everything's hard for her to do. And
right.
Yeah, I don't know. So this is, I think, what's almost more interesting than the fact that Parian's power has a mysterious true use is the fact that the fandom is completely insane about this, somewhat including me, honestly, because like if there's a mystery to be solved,
because Wildbow hasn't told you.
Because Wildbow hasn't told us, and there's a mystery to be solved, and if someone says, "Oh, by the way, you should be able to figure it out from the text," then anyone with the slightest puzzle solving bone in their body is just like, "Oh, well, I will be the one to solve it then," and cue thousands of posts trying to guess the true use of Parian's power, which someone apparently has guessed it, and it's just kind of being kept under wraps, which is fine.
I'm probably not going to bother.
Next one.
Yeah,
next one.
That's cool, though. I like that.
You'll like this one, Scott. You'll like this one.
What is it, man?
Brian lied about his trigger.
No. Who would have seen that coming?
I don't know.
Oh wait, it was me.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
Yeah.
Let's see right here. Scott speculation number 7, made on April 5th, 2017. Brian's background story is at least partially bullshit. Boom.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, like, especially after you understand more about triggers and stuff, it just makes no sense that this story happened the way it did. But like, I don't know. I think that this was honestly one of your predictions where people were like, "How the fuck did you guess that?"
I don't know. I don't remember how much we knew about Brian at this point of the story, but he seemed like a guy who would posture, and if like he was very uncomfortable telling his story, and like he seemed like the type of person that would embellish in order to avoid weakness or make himself look better than he did. And the more we learned about him, the more that became true. And like the more confident in this I was, although we never got any in-story justification of it. But
and I couldn't find a Word of God that actually like the actual quote that says what really happened. But my recollection, which may be faulty, was something like he was using his power to hide, which is what you really think this power is being used for.
Right. It never made sense that he triggered. Like, cause even when I was trying to get my head around it, I was like, okay, so he triggered so he could hide his sister, but then he says he beat his dad up. I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. and then he like somehow didn't notice his trigger event, which was kind of the weirdest part. Next one. This, I guess I just thought this was kind of interesting, that it's interesting to think about that, like, so the reason that, I'm just gonna say it first. So Gallant actually knew Amy was in love with Victoria and that she hated him and was jealous of him, and was kind of keeping an eye on her, and was potentially, there to be a positive force, but he got killed by Leviathan before he could do anything about it. I just kind of like that as a bit of like, Waldo really did think of everything. No,
that's I think that's really cool, and I think that it brings that whole scene into more light when he's talking to her and trying to help her out. That of course he kind of had he's a guy who could sense emotions, right? So it kind of makes sense that he would be able to pick up on this kind of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
cool.
So this is my last one that I'm pulling out.
Okay.
And there's, a whole genre of Worm Word of God has to do with like the details of powers, and that's just not something that I'm going to spend a huge amount of time on. I think the Mailbag one was one, but another one here, it would be Hero's power. Hero being, the original triumvirate Cauldron Cape, was basically an unrestricted Tinker version of Scion's broad, terrifying wavelengths power, which we see Scion use in very versatile ways. You can almost say most of what he does is some application of this like golden light wavelengths stilling, dissolving, stopping things, wavelength power. So I just thought that was a neat bit of flavor.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know if I have anything to say about that other than
right.
Cool. And there's probably going to be some Word of God stuff that we left out that you guys are disappointed that we didn't broach or talk about. And the reason is because I don't have a lot to say about it. Like, someone sent me Damsel of Distress's trigger event, and that was cool to read, but I don't know what else to say besides that was cool to read. And that's how I feel about a lot of the really deep dive info into how the powers work and where they come from is stuff that I think is cool, but I don't know what to say.
Yeah, some of these I'm almost just mentioning, so listeners who may not be up to speed on the Word of God will be like, oh, okay, cool, and then move on with their day.
Right, yeah.
So that wraps up the Worm segment of the mailbag. So now we're moving on into Ward-specific questions.
Yeah.
From Sir Graug, who do you think the protagonist will be? Is this person a new character? And if so, what kind of character do you want or expect? If you think it's an existing character, which one would you want or expect?
So I was about 50-50 on this, and I was like, well, it depends on what the point, what the themes of this new story are and what Wildbow wants to do with it. But then, so many people asked me this question that, it was if it wasn't someone we've heard of, then people probably would not have asked the question as much.
Yeah, right.
So I'm on the side of this is an existing character. This is someone we know. This is someone we've seen before. Who is it? I don't know. I'm revealing something a bit. I've seen the banner on the Parahuman subreddit, which has the character a blonde woman, very prominently on it. Also, we today, as we record this, got our new cover art image for We've Got Ward, which is, guys, it's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Lonsheep did that for us, and it's amazing. I can't wait to show you guys. But so I know it's a woman. I know it's a blonde woman. I don't have a lot of guesses right now. I mean, the one I kind of thought it might be was Valkyrie. She's blonde, right? I think. Maybe I made that up.
I think she is.
Because it seemed like we were setting that up at the end of the epilogue, but I honestly don't know, and I am drawing a blank as to which known women characters are blonde in this story. I don't know. I know. You know what? I'm okay not knowing. Yeah. I'm really okay with this. I think who the character is going to be very important to what the story is going to be discussing. So I kind of want to find that out when I read it. So I'm fine
thank
with that.
Thank you for sparing my poker face / voice.
All right.
Yeah. Next question, also from Sir Graug. What characters do you think will appear in the sequel? Are there any that you want to see more of? That you feel has more potential, etc.?
Yeah. Yes. I think we're gonna see the Undersiders. I hope it doesn't focus too much on the Undersiders. I don't like. I mean, here's the thing about character arcs. Like, you can complete an arc, but that doesn't mean you have to be done with the character. Like, the character can go through something completely different, and there can be a new character arc. So, like, I don't want to say, like, it seems like Tattletale's gone through something, and therefore I don't want to see her go through something else again. That's not true. But I hope it doesn't focus on those guys as much. I hope we explore some other characters. I would like to see more Amy. I really would. I would like to see how she's doing in this world. I really thought before I knew it was a girl that Golem would make a great protagonist of this story. And so I'd like to see him more. That's been a common theme throughout these questions, is more Golem, because I really like him. Yeah. I am very excited to see what the story is and where the story goes, because I think there is a world of possibilities that we leave Worm with, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, based on that, Necroburst asked just if you have any other general speculations.
So, if Worm is about dealing with trauma, I think like a lot of the story is going to central on the aftermath of everything that happened, and like you have mankind separated amongst thousands of worlds. You have people trying to recover. You have Capes who already were dealing with traumatic events now have another shared trauma in the Khepri moment. So you're going to be dealing with the aftermath of that. I think we're going to get to see, like, there was a lot of, like, when I would moralize throughout the story, there was a lot of people talking about how, well, no, this is kind of, Brockton Bay after Leviathan is kind of post-apocalyptic, and therefore the rule of law has kind of faded. And I kind of pushed back against that at the time, because structure was still very much in place. And now we're going to go to a world that structure is almost non-existent and is attempting to be put in place. And I think there's a lot of drama to be ripped from that. I hope that our point of view character is someone very different from Taylor, so we can explore this world from the perspective of someone different. I think that's the most interesting way to do it. I almost hope Taylor's not in it at all. We know she's locked away on a separate world, but this is a magical power universe, so there's no saying she couldn't get out of there eventually. But I hope we leave her behind, and I think we will. That's all I got for now. I don't know. Did any of that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I know so little more than you, but I still can't open my mouth. So
we'll be caught up. Yeah. We'll be caught up so soon.
Yeah, I know.
It's gonna be fast.
So yeah, let's move on into the general / personal questions. So from Glass Girl Cece, she asks, how did we decide on Lacrimosa from Mozart's Requiem as the opening music? And they go on to say that this is the most fitting, most perfect music that we could have possibly chosen, and they're just trying to embarrass me. Yeah, and also the fact that we played different movements of Requiem to accent the Endbringer fights, and we played another part of the Requiem during the part where we were reading kind of the end, that we were summarizing, talking about the end of the story. So I had this idea, long, at the beginning, obviously, that, so first of all, like, Lacrimosa is, a funeral mass. It's extremely powerful and sad and tragic. And I couldn't think of anything that better captured, like, my feelings about Worm at that point in my life. Cause, like, it's funny. I almost, like, am like I was like almost sad. I was like still sad about Worm at that point. Like I'd finished it recently enough that I was like still sad about it. And especially after doing this project, I think I see a lot more like good and like potential for good that kind of makes it a less thoroughly sad story. So that's interesting. But like definitely the first time I read it, I was just like, wow, this is a really powerful tragedy, and there's nothing better than Requiem, and specifically Lacrimosa as like the lighter, movement to introduce. Of course, Scott, you did all the work in terms of actually editing it in, which you did extremely well. Did you want to comment on that at all from your end?
Yeah. So it like Glass Girl Cece says that playing that one movement during our discussion at the very end of 30.7 was what pushed them into crying. And is it weird that makes me happy? Like, first of all, like it was Matt's complete, like the music was Matt's idea from the get-go. Like the opening music, which part we used at the end, I was just editing it. And then to play the music over that final arc was completely Matt's idea. And I was so stressed out about it because like I sat there and tinkered with it for over an hour because I was so concerned about getting the volume right. And like there was a spot where I needed to loop it. But I wanted to make sure the loop didn't like completely toss off the tone and wasn't like noticeable and jarring. So like I worked on it for so long, and I'm so happy it worked on you and it hit the emotional core that we were trying for. I'm so happy for that. So thank you. But yeah, I love the music, and Matt, have you thought about what we're going to open We've Got Ward with yet? Do you know?
Oh man, no,
this
God.
This is a big, it's a big
geez.
thing to follow up on, Matt.
Yeah, I know.
You've got a week.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is I felt so much like certainty. Like when I thought of using this music, I was like, yep, that's it. There will never be any better choice than this. But I haven't really thought about
it. It really is perfect. And the funny thing is, like, I hear Lacrimosa everywhere now. And it's like, it is very, very widely used, but it sticks out to me so much more now because I listen to it over and over again in editing that like anytime a story, a TV show or a movie or something used it, I'm just like, hey.
Yeah, I noticed the other day that like a different movement is in Watchmen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's like one of the most beautiful pieces of music in the world, so it makes sense. But yeah. Tonally, I think it fits. Yeah. So another question from Enemordi. What are your favorite aspects of Walbo's writing that you want to see more of?
The words. Like all of it. Like this is I want to see his work with character. I want to see how he's like the big thing for me is I want to see how he's improved, because Worm is a thing that he did. Has it been 3 years removed now? More maybe?
I don't keep good track of numbers, but yeah, it feels like that's.
But this is
I think it might have ended. Yeah. Yeah,
but this is the first big thing he worked on, and we're for now skipping the two things he worked on between Worm and Ward. So I feel like the time skip, I'm going to get to jump from his first work to his fourth work, and I'm going to get to see how he has honed his craft since then. I'm going to get to see the steps that he's made to improve his already very good writing. So I am just very excited to see more of him and see and learn more about the author through the way he writes and what he has learned in this process, which I'm sure is extensive. I can't imagine going through 3 projects as long as Worm, Pact, and Twig without, really honing your craft moving into this. So that's what I'm very excited to see.
Yeah, I look forward to learning, honestly, because how to say this? I feel like I can identify what Wildbow is doing throughout Worm.
Yeah.
Almost all the time. In Twig, which I have read, sometimes I am in awe of something and I can't necessarily explain why exactly. And that's the kind of thing where I'm like, okay, well, now I need to study this so I can understand that, because I can't stand for there to be an aspect of writing technique that I just don't understand. And I'm sure we're going to see that in Ward.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I loved about this project so much, is I think we learned as much as everyone else did.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Next question, another from Enamordi. Scott, are you planning to read Twig and or Pact on your own?
Yes.
Yeah, and I haven't read Pact, and I the only reason I haven't read it is I'm just like thinking like maybe we'll do some kind of project with it, but like that's not a plan. That's a
yeah. Be careful. Be careful what you say.
That's a question mark of like that's just the reason I haven't read it. That's not a plan. Anyway, moving on. Another from ENMRD. Can we comment? Can we recommend other things, other media that people might like?
All books.
Yeah.
No.
Our book club.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. We don't advertise it too much on here, but we do a book club every month where we read a book chosen by our patrons, and we've read Stephen King, we've read Tana French, we've read Neil Gaiman.
Slash Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, slash Terry Pratchett. I love books. The thing that I'm realizing is I think I've said this on a mailbag before, but I'm going through a book of like the book of great books that's going back and talking about all the classics. So I'm going back and going through classic literature. And if you haven't read some of the classics since you were forced to in high school, I really recommend you go back and do that. Like, really spend some time. Like, go read Dickens. Like, seriously, sit down with Charles Dickens and really pick apart his books, because he's brilliant. He really is brilliant. And like, if you love reading but you haven't really touched all that classic-y stuff that they made you read in high school, like, do it. Like, there's a reason why these books are still read today, and it's not just to torture you in your English class. Like, the themes and the things that these people work with, it's so beautiful and wonderful and powerful.
Yeah. Reading classics to me is like meditation, where I know I should do it, and then when I do it, I enjoy the hell out of it, but it sounds so boring in the abstract that I never get around to it.
Understandable.
Yeah, that's I. So in terms of specific things, I think I probably like have already recommended a lot of my like favorite things here and there, and maybe even on like one of the last mailbags. But like I'm a big fan of Neil Stephenson and everything Neil Stephenson has ever written. I think literally everything Neil Stephenson has ever written. I really enjoy Blindsight and the sequel Echopraxia by Peter Watts. Those are like two of my favorite science fiction things. In particular, Blindsight I think is one where like if you enjoy this idea of picking apart the themes of a story, Blindsight is a story where the characters, the story, the internal and external drama, and sort of the antagonist, if you will, are all thematically resonant in a way that is extremely satisfying. So that's like why that story is satisfying to me, and why I can't shut up about it ever. I don't get to see a lot of new movies, so unfortunately I can't really recommend movies.
But you can listen to the Daily Planet podcast where we talk about all the new movies. There's a plug. Also, we should plug our Kryptonian collection, because those are some of the movies we love, because that's a list of the best movies ever that we're slowly compiling, that will probably never end. But check that out on our website, and you'll see a list of, I think there's 10 in the collection right now. That's a really great list of films that we think you'll like. So, yeah,
and it's funny, that kind of reminds me of this idea of reading the classics, because a lot of those are movies that I never would have seen. Like I probably never would have seen Audition. I don't think I ever would have made myself watch Videodrome. Unless I was forced to. But having watched it, I'm like, I get it. Like, this was kind of like, I get why this was important and why people talk about this movie. So
yeah.
Cool. This is interesting. So, question from Remnet. Would we consider playing Weaver dice?
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that that's not a plan or a promise, but that does sound really fun.
Yeah, there is one of the things that I think is going to be cool about We've Got Ward is the week-to-week time strain on us is going to be a lot lower than it is, which allows us to do a lot more things. Like, we did the fun Fugly Bob commercials, and then we just got so freaking busy that we could never do them again. And fun stuff like that, fun stuff like having bonus episodes where we play some Weaver dice is stuff that I can see happening in the future. Now that the level of reading and analyzing we have to do week to week is much lower. Those are things I definitely want to do in the future. So we're thinking about those. We're thinking about having more interviews and more guests and that kind of thing as well. But we'll see. You know, we're thinking about all these things. We want to do a lot with this show, and we think we're going to have the bandwidth to do it, and we're really excited about that.
Yeah, totally. From Proudly Arrogant, what character, personality, or archetype would you most like to see written in Wildbow's style?
Oh boy, that's tough. Do you got one?
No, not really. Like that. This is one of those questions where I'm almost.
I'm overwhelmed with options almost.
Yeah. I almost just want to like read it so that so that listeners can just be like, oh, that is a good question,
right? And
then think about it, because like you said, I just kind of like start paging through my favorite characters and thinking like, how would Wildbow take on that, specific archetype? Well,
and one of the cool things about Worm is that it's so wide that a lot of the archetypes that I like are already covered.
Yeah.
Right. Like, not saying there's nothing else he could do, but like, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of very unique types of characters.
Right.
Like, there's not a lot of overlap in characters in this story. Like, we compared a lot of people to Taylor thematically, but the characters themselves are fundamentally different. Like, Alexandria and Taylor have a lot in common in how they approached problems and the decisions they made, but they come from completely different areas to get to those decisions.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree. Like, it sort of transcends archetype, the way he tends to do it. Not that it doesn't fall within an archetype, but it's always just like, okay, but how would a real person instantiate this?
That being said, I would really like to see a first-person point of view of the classic kind of hero archetype. Like I'm repeating myself, but like the golem type, or like the seeing, really not just seeing the mind of, but seeing through the eyes of what a really good, like classical good person, like your golem, your chevalier type, like how they see this world and how they go on with the terribleness that's around them. I think that would be fun to see.
I was thinking along similar lines, honestly. I wasn't sure how to phrase it. Yeah, I agree with that. So, final question, but remember to stay tuned until the end of the episode.
Yes.
From the words "Hello World" to backwards.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Well done.
Thinking of our own kids or theoretical future kids, will you recommend this book to them? And if so, at what age?
I will let the person with children go first on this one. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely will. At what age, I think that's going to depend on a lot of, a lot on the kid, a lot of the specific kid. Like I was more than up to reading like long, complex novels when I was like 12, but there's the violent subject matter in Worm is a bit on the high side, but like on the other hand, I also watched plenty of violent movies when I was like 12.
Yep.
So I don't want to just say like 12, but like I think kids can handle things, especially in this day and age.
I agree with you. I don't have any children, but the answer is, yeah, I want them to read this, especially as teenagers, because I think there's a lot of important things that this book says about bullying. I mean, just on the surface level, this is a book about bullying and trauma and how the things you do to people ripple out and affect everything. And I think that's an important lesson for kids, especially as they get into their teens. So, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I agree with you that we we sometimes sell our kids pretty short. Like, they can handle stuff we don't think that they can. I saw Aliens when I was 7, and I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah. And, I'm probably going to come back and laugh at myself for saying this in like 10 years. But, like, if I had something like this podcast in like about a book that I liked when I was a teenager, instead of like what I actually had in my English classes, I think my development as a literary human being would have been accelerated by like 20 years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It really is amazing thinking back to English and how much I loved reading the books and how much I hated going to class where we got to talk about the books, considering that's what we do now. But right. I just think that conversation was so structured and controlled and really didn't leave room for analysis. Like I just remember like multiple choice questions about a novel. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Yeah.
Right. It's one of my favorite things to rant about, honestly.
Yeah.
So I'll restrain myself. But yeah, that was that. Thank you for all your great questions. I think we probably got to more questions than we usually do.
Oh yeah. Usually our episodes, our mailbag episodes are shorter, and this one is going to be long.
Yeah.
But it's because we don't want to leave.
We didn't want to, I mean, I just wanted to answer all those. Yeah, that's it. That's Worm. We're done.
I guess you can reach out to us if you want to talk to us at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. I guess we should say that the email contact and the Twitter contact are not going to change. Neither is the feed. We're not going to create a We've Got Ward feed. We're just going to upload them. So if you're subscribed, nothing will change from your perspective. It'll all come. You can reach us at the same place. We'll reach you at the same place. We're not going to shake up any of that stuff. I guess we should have said that earlier, but yeah. And you can follow me on Twitter at ScottDaily85. Matt's is at MoreDinamail. I will say that right on the final episode.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
As always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film, and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. This week over on the main channel, I think it will come out Thursday. We had to move our schedule around a little bit this week because of New Year's, but we're going to be discussing some of our favorite films of the year. Co-host Michael Grubb will be there, as well as my fantastic wife will be making a return to discuss some of her favorite movies of the year. We're also going to be piloting some new shows over the next couple weeks. One might already be out by the time you're listening to this, but so check out the main Daily Planet podcast feed. And tune in to try some of those new shows. We want feedback on those new shows. We're basically, I don't know if you guys know how Amazon does their pilot season, but we're basically trying to do the same thing where we make one and then ask you to tell us if you like it or not, and if you like it enough, we'll make more. So please do that.
Yeah, I'm working on the new show too, and also as soon as I get internet, I'll be resuming so-called writers.
Yeah, you maybe have noticed that Matt's sound quality has not been up to our usual standards. It's because Matt has been. How long has it been, Matt? Has it been over a month without internet?
It's been over a month. I think maybe I stayed an extra day in the hotel just so that I could use their internet. And that was like the last time that I had proper sound quality.
Yeah. So that, we'll get there. As Matt gets situated, shows will return. New shows will come. We ask you to give them a shot and give us feedback. We love feedback. Please let us know what you think. Let us know if you think we can do better. Let us know. We can take it.
Yeah. And if you like any of our shows and want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. Yeah, consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Special thanks this week to new Planeteers, Rain at the $4 level.
Hey, we know him.
Hey, we do.
We do know him.
Oscar at the $1 level, David at the $1 level, Try at the $1 level, and Jeff at the $1 level. and Kryptonian, the man who was at the $20 level, who asked us to give an extra special thanks to Andrew O.
Thanks.
So yeah, thank you very much, all of you, including Andrew O. And we really appreciate it. And all of our patrons who have made this possible and motivated us and made it possible for us to do cool stuff like the fan art contest. It wouldn't be the same without you guys.
No, yeah.
And also, speaking of Patreon, make sure you stop by Wildbow's page and toss some money there, because he's the guy that is going to be making Ward possible.
Yeah. And if you can't afford to pledge right now, or just waiting to see how much we screw up the new show format and We've Got Ward, you can still help us out by heading over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. This week we have 2 new reviews, Matt, and they're the 2 final reviews we'll have on this podcast before we switch over and everyone starts telling us how much better they liked the old show than the new one. Just kidding. I hope. The first review comes from Arczidia, who gives us 5 stars and says, Matt and Scott take us step by step through the wonderful and traumatizing story that is Worm. This podcast has helped me see the minor details in writing and character development that I overlooked on my first read-through. I love Wildbow's writing, and We've Got Worm has made it easy for me to explain to my friends why the story is so well done. If I had to sum up how I feel about this podcast in 3 words, it would be, I love this. Thank you. I love this meme, I guess, that our show has taken on. Is something I did not expect, because I had no idea that I did that until people started listening to us talk every week. I mean, and then now I catch myself saying it all the time, and I'm like, oh, damn it.
But it's such a wonderful, like, positive catchphrase.
It is. Like, I want Daily Planet Productions, our catchphrase, to be, I love this, because I want to be positive. I want, like, there is so much negativity in this world. There's so much negative criticism of the things that we like, the entertainment that we like, that I want us to be a beacon of positivity, because I love stories. I love stories in every shape and form, and I'm glad that comes through in this podcast.
Right. We like liking things.
Yeah.
And I think everyone else does too.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think sometimes it's very easy to be negative. I think it's sometimes harder to be positive, and that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we have another 5-star review from Dr. Michael Train. A doctor, Matt. A doctor gives us 5 stars and says, I was a slow adopter of this podcast due to the 2+ hour length of each episode. Yeah, sorry about that. How would they keep it interesting? I don't know. So I only listened when they got to an arc I particularly loved. I love to hate blank slates, and that was that. I listened to the back episodes and even found myself finding excuses to go on long drives to finish each week's pod before the next one came out. I devoured Worm in a 4-month block of feverish reading, and I loved it. And I had all these thoughts, but none of my friends had ever heard of it, to my chagrin. I love that I found this podcast where I can live vicariously through Scott as he goes through all the great, heartbreaking, and downright staggering moments in this great story. That was great. I completely agree with you, except for the driving thing. I hate driving, so I would never go on a long drive. I just lock myself in my office with headphones on and listen to podcasts for way too long. But thank you guys so much. Thanks for all the reviews. We've got 50+ reviews during the course of this podcast on iTunes, and that's just on the American store. We've got reviews on all the international iTunes things as well. So thank you guys for doing that. It really does help, and please keep it up through Ward. I think it's really going to help us get exposure, and we really do appreciate it. Yeah.
It's been amazing. I don't think either of us ever expected to get this kind of feedback.
No.
And it makes it so worth it. Yeah. All right, Scott, it's time.
But Matt, I don't want it to end.
Well, fortunately for you, then we have one final question.
Oh, good.
From Loger or Eoger.
Yeah. From
I
that
just
person.
want to know if and how Worm and this podcast have changed your lives.
So yeah, I think we saved this for the end because I just want to take we're 2 hours and 40 minutes into this podcast, so I just want to take like 20 minutes to thank every single one of you guys listening. This year, like we started this in March, and this year has been crazy. Like it's weird to say because for a lot of the world, 2017 was such a shit show, but like I had like the best year of my life. And a lot of that is because of you guys and because of this project and because of the interaction and the friendships and the learning I've done through this thing. It was so much work, but it is work that I am so proud of. I'm so proud of what we did here. I'm so happy it resonated with you guys. I'm so happy I got to read this story. This has fundamentally changed our lives, like in huge ways. We are doing this at, like we are producing like content, and a lot of you guys are supporting us, and we are like I'm shifting more and more of my time to doing this, and this is something I want to keep doing. And I like, sorry, I'll let you talk, Matt, but I am blown away by the response to this, guys. I'm blown away by you, like this community. You guys have welcomed us with open arms, and thank you so much.
Yeah, and don't stop if you have more to say, Scott. But I would say that I feel incredibly fortunate to have something every day, no matter what's going on in my life, that I am excited about as much as I am about this project. Whatever I'm doing, whether I'm working on doing the synopsis and I'm solving, a complicated mental problem that's engaging my faculties of like, how am I going to distill what's important about this, which is really, it's so satisfying to be able to use your mind to the fullest, and whether it's that part or whether it's doing the actual recording session with you, which is always fun, even when we're up past midnight doing it, or whether it's releasing the episode and interacting with all you guys on Reddit or on the Discord, or man, even the handful of incidents where I've met people in real life who have familiar with the podcast and get the feeling of being an extremely minor celebrity for the first time in my life, which is not something I ever expected to come of the Worm podcast.
Yeah. This, like, we both have full-time jobs that we're still doing, and I do not love my job. The stuff I do has never been something I was like particularly proud of. It's just like something I needed to do to make money. So it has been a rare experience in my life where I've been able to look at something that I've made and been really proud of it. And I am so proud of what we did here, and I'm so thankful for all of you for helping us along that way. Like, you guys are so key to all this. This would just be me and Matt talking to each other for 3 hours a week. And it's like, this is all because of you guys. And I'm so floored and thrilled. And I never want to stop doing this. Like, I never want to stop. I want to do this. I want to be able to do this full time. I want to be able to take this thing that Matt and I have made and take over the world. And yeah. I think we have an opportunity to teach people and learn ourselves. And like that positivity we were talking about before, that spreading the positivity, I want to do that, because stories are awesome and stories are important, and like, I love them so much. And this is, I know I'm droning on because I don't want this to end, but this has been the experience of a lifetime for me. And Matt, like, thank you so much for this, because guys, Matt is the unsung hero of this thing, I think, because as much work as I put into this thing, I think Matt put in double, because he's got to parse through all these words and find the ones to pull out without hinting or spoiling things. And he's got to like deal with me with a straight face when I just start like throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And like, you've been awesome throughout this whole thing. And like, this would not be half of what it was without you. So thanks, man.
I appreciate that. And what's funny is like, I just feel gratitude toward you because so thank you for being like game to do this, because man, like, just who has a friend who is open to going on such like an open-ended, uncertain adventure, with no net, and it's when we started this, we didn't know what it was going to be.
We had no idea. Like we had no idea, and we stumbled into the format. We stumbled into everything, and we had what we thought was a good idea and a couple of microphones. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
And I can't finish this without thanking Wildbow, because like I on some level, like, so most of what we've said so far has been like, how did the podcast affect our lives? But like Worm just like kind of blew me away, and I actually didn't kind of blew me away, like it completely blew me away, and it got me writing again, like in a serious way. Nothing that I've released, and that doesn't matter to me though. Like that doesn't matter at all to me. What matters to me is that this so inspired me, like not only Worm, but the story of how Wildbow wrote it and how he like carved out this existence for himself, got me writing again. And that's a huge thing for me. Like that's a really emotional thing for me to say. And so like, thank you for making this story, and thank you for like inspiring me, Wildbow, and letting us do this in the first place,
Yeah, and like being game with it and interacting with it, and like I will never forget the first time. Like I think it was like 5:00 in the evening, and I was on my way home from work, and like happened to refresh the Reddit thread, and I was like, "Holy shit, Matt! Wildbow just wrote about our podcast. He's listening to our podcast," and just like this moment of like, oh shit, like, oh no. And like, but like that interactivity was so great. Like it was so fun getting to talk about a work and then getting to interact with the creator of that work. And like, I think it's a testament to how good the writing is that you feel like you know him a little bit through his writing. Like I've obviously never met this guy. I don't know who he is really, but I know kind of what he is, if that makes sense, through like the stories he chooses to tell. And I don't know, like, yeah, I echo that sentiment. Thank you, Wildbow, so much. Thank you for creating this thing. Like this thing is complex and beautiful, and the themes in it I think are so important. The idea that like we are all suffering from something, and we are all going through trauma, and we are all trying to find our place in this really cruel, unfair, tough world where people are mean to each other for no reason sometimes, just no reason. And how do you navigate this, and how do you find a place to where you can be okay? And even as you make mistakes and make bad decisions and hurt yourself and hurt others. And I think that's such an important thing, especially in our modern day world, to have a story that looks into that without holding back.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess we should end the podcast now.
Yeah, no, I agree. My heart is full of gratitude for all of you.
Yeah.
That was Worm. And join us next week for episode 1 of We've Got Ward, covering the prologue, Glowworm. But for now, that's a wrap on We've Got Worm.
Bye-bye.
So many emotions.
I know.